This boy woke up in the worst situation possible. He was inside a truck packed with zombie monsters. After being brutally beaten, he found himself in a bizarre place. In truth, this man was a living legend of the army. He could face hundreds of soldiers alone, but in the middle of a mission, he was betrayed by his comrades. Now he had reincarnated as Michio, a boy who was beaten and forced to work, but now things would be different. Michio was a monster in military combat, capable of defeating an entire army. A helicopter flies through the sky, carrying the elite special forces of the Aldemir Republic, codename Ghost. They were feared by soldiers and terrorist organizations worldwide, the world's greatest special forces unit. Among them, there was a man known as the Strongest, George Sai, standing with a pistol in hand. Without mercy, he annihilates his enemies like a machine. People call him and revere him as the warlord. But on July 6, 2025, the strongest man met his end in battle. During the operation to eliminate the terrorist organization, Ignite, the soldiers report that the helicopter is unstable due to strong winds. They're changing the drop-off point, but the Ghost Captain argues the surprise attack will be ruined. If they proceed this way, half the squad will die. He insists they must continue as planned, but George swings a rope, and Beck demands to know what he's doing. George announces he's going first, and they can meet him at point B. Beck yells for him to wait, but the warlord descends on the rope, crouching on the ground without taking any damage. Then he looks forward coldly. Beck asks if they can turn back, but the soldier says it's impossible. They'll proceed to point B, telling George to just not get himself killed. The soldier keeps moving forward relentlessly, until a light points at his head. The sniper takes the shot. George spins around instantly. Using a statue to block the bullet, he prepares to counterattack. He moves out from cover, aiming his weapon, hitting the sniper in the head and arms. The soldier falls from the top of the building, but a gun is pointed at the back of George's neck. He turns, but the assassin tells him not to move. Just as he was about to fire, George elbows his forearm, deflecting the shot. He sweeps the man's heel, then gets behind him and applies a rear naked choke, finishing him off by breaking his neck. George glances to the side, noting that they were still there. The assassins open fire on him relentlessly. George moves, using the other mercenary as a human shield, commenting that this is a pretty rude reception. He points his own gun at them and takes aim, firing non-stop, taking the lives of everyone in front of him. Beck shouts for George to respond if he's okay. He repeats the call as George picks up his radio. Then he heads towards the gate. Elsewhere, at point B, a soldier reports that entry preparations are complete and asks about George, but Beck says there's been no response, and that he was too eager to die. The door suddenly opens. Everyone turns, weapons in hand, but Beck is surprised. George reports that the mansion is secure and he'll leave the intel gathering to him. The soldier sighs in relief. Outside, they comment that he actually did it. He's still a monster, calling him warlord. But Beck calls out to George. He demands to know why he acted alone, stating that those who don't follow orders are useless to the team. George replies that the mission was a success. Besides, if they had forced the operation in that situation, the entire unit could have been annihilated. Beck scoffs and tells him not to talk back. One of the soldiers stands at attention and reports that the commander-in-chief is calling for the captain. Beck says the brat must be rebelling, but George tells him not to get the wrong idea. He did it to repay a favor, since all it takes is to kill the enemy and win. It's not that he wants to rebel, it's for a purpose. Beck considers this for a moment, turning around and telling the brat to just go die. He was heading to headquarters and was counting on him to do only what he was told. George asks what he was just instructed to do. Then he asks what the instructions are. But everyone points their weapons at him, and George questions what this means. The soldiers apologize, saying it was Beck's orders. The protagonist thinks about this. He tries to draw the weapon at his waist, but they open fire, hitting him in the head. George thinks, Beck's orders, and wonders what this means. Does this mean he planned to kill me from the very beginning? But a blonde woman had told George to come back alive. That was Sophia. Suddenly, the protagonist wakes up, wondering what that sound is. There's also the smell of death. He's face to face with a zombie. He gets up, wondering what happened. He was definitely on the annihilation mission against Ignite. The truck's cargo bay opens, dumping all the bodies out towards the sea. George falls, thinking this is bad. The scaffolding is collapsing. He starts to go down with them, but he grabs onto an edge, holding on for dear life. He gasps for breath, fueled by adrenaline. George climbs up, thinking how dangerous that was. That was a terrifying number of corpses, and the stench is awful. Are these the front lines of the bizarre district? He wonders. Two men talk about clearing out the trash first thing in the morning, just thinking of it as feeding the fish in Tokyo Bay. George overhears this and thinks about what it means. Suddenly, a gust of wind blows off his blindfold. George repeats, Japan, his homeland. So, on July 6, 2026, George Sai lost his life and was reincarnated on an island of the purest despair he could ever experience. George wonders what the hell this is. He thought he was in the Middle East. How did he end up in Tokyo Bay? He turns, thinking about clues. It's just a truck. He keeps walking and reaches a forest. He sighs after walking for so long. George thinks he's having trouble breathing. He wonders what happened to his body, so he keeps walking. He thinks he needs to find food and water first. He snaps a branch in half, releasing water, and drinks from it high up in a tree. He reflects that this reminds him of the time he got separated from his team in the jungle, but he notices something different. It was a small outlying town. George keeps walking through the area. He thinks this must be somewhere around Tokyo Bay. He steps on a used tube of toothpaste, reflecting that this kind of filth shouldn't exist in Japan. But something else catches his attention. He looks into a piece of glass, noticing that this wasn't his face, it was someone else. Then, someone grabs his shoulder, calling him Michio. George reacts instantly, putting the man in a chokehold. The guy asks what's wrong, saying it's him, Masa. The protagonist wonders if the man knows him. He doesn't seem to be armed, so he lets him go, thinking his name is now Michio. Masa asks why he did that all of a sudden. Michio asks what he wants, and the guy says he's his friend. Michio understands and extends a hand, apologizing. Masa shakes his hand. He says he's relieved to see him okay and was worried since he took such a bad beating. Michio asks, "I was beaten? Why?" Masa explains that Zeha's word is law in this mining area, and that's the reason. But then Zeha appears, asking what he just called him, and especially him, a mere slave from his own team, daring to speak to him without using an honorific. Now he's going to get a penalty. He raises his arm and punches the young man. He lands near the mirror. Zeha comments that he's so stupid for forgetting the rules, and if you forget, you get a penalty. If you piss me off, you're the one who pays. Masa apologizes, saying he was wrong. It was Michio who said his name without an honorific first, and he was just influenced by him. Zeha turns towards him, saying it's a surprise he survived after being beaten so badly. But the protagonist doesn't react, just stares at him. Zeha asks what's with those eyes. Looks like he didn't get beaten enough. George still doesn't respond or react. Zeha says that smug look on his face is about to get a penalty right now. He throws a punch, but George dodges it, thinking it was too obvious. His opponent is an amateur. George states he has no interest in attacking civilians, but if he insists on fighting, he will take control of this situation. He ducks under a punch as Zeha tells him to shut up. George lands a punch on his face. Zeha starts to lose consciousness, but he stands his ground, resisting. Then he curses, growing even more enraged. George thinks he landed a counterattack, but the man didn't fall. This body is weaker than I expected, but he still advances toward him. Zeha tries to strike with another punch. The protagonist leaps, thinking that even with this weak body, his elbow should be strong enough to take him down. He smashes his elbow into the man's chin. Zeha reels in pain. He then falls to the ground, and George tells him it's impossible to win. He should take his petty fights elsewhere, unless he wants to die. Then, he turns away. Zeha says he was underestimating him and pulls something from his coat. He draws a knife, declaring that anyone who fights back will receive 100 penalties. George immediately spins around, but a child steps in front of him, yelling that it's too dangerous. Zeha lunges with the knife. The boy shuts his eyes in fear, but the protagonist moves first. He grabs Zeha's knife-wielding arm. He warns him that now that a weapon is drawn, he's prepared to take a life, or lose his own. He fiercely strikes with his hand, hitting Zeha in the neck. Using his leg for leverage, he throws him to the ground. He then mounts the man. The boy screams in shock, unable to believe what's happening. Zeha coughs from the pain racking his body, but he is quickly overcome with fear. The protagonist raises his fist. Zeha tries to scream, begging him to wait, to stop, but the protagonist says you don't say things like that in a fight to the death, and he smashes his fist into the man's face with all his might. The child is stunned. George gets up. Zeha is knocked out on the ground. The protagonist notes that he hit him with his full weight, but that was all the damage he could inflict. He needs to do something about this weak body first. The boy is bewildered by the display, but then reality sets in. He asks what's gotten into Michio. The protagonist looks back. He wonders who this kid is and why he seems so familiar, but the boy asks if he's messing with him. George replies that he has amnesia. Q says it's him, the guy who lives next door. Michio apologizes, saying he doesn't even remember his name. Q runs after him, asking if he's forgotten him too. Zeha, enraged, screams that this will earn him a mega punishment. On the way home, Q comments that he was incredibly strong back there and wants to learn how to fight too. George replies that, more importantly, he wants to know about this island. The boy says they have no choice. This is the industrial waste island, floating in Tokyo Bay, a heap of garbage and filth. The protagonist thinks he's never heard of such a place and wonders if it really exists in Japan. Men are forced to work in the mines. Women and children can only survive by selling things or scavenging through trash. Security is as bad as it sounds. The island is a giant cesspool. George thinks it's like a post-war slum, maybe even worse. Q spots a loaf of bread on a table table. He starts daydreaming about eating it. The vendor tells the brat to get lost, betting he's broke. Q tells him not to assume things, but the protagonist hands over a bill. He asks for the bread. The vendor agrees, and Q asks if he's serious about giving it to him. George says it's a thank you for the information earlier, and the boy thanks him, but he wants to know where he got the money. The protagonist says it was the spoils from the earlier fight. He won't stoop to taking money from the dead, but in a place like this, money matters. Q says this Michio had become a completely different person now. At his house, he opens the door and announces he's home. They're going to celebrate tonight with his mother since Michio bought this for them. His mom says he should eat too, but Q replies that he's already eaten. His mom asks if he's sure, and the boy tells her not to worry and to eat because she needs to stay strong. Suddenly, the protagonist smells something strange. He spins around on reflex. He slams his elbow back to shut the door. Q calls out his name. The protagonist keeps holding the door, trying to open it with all his might. Fire begins to engulf the house. Q's mother starts to cough. The soldiers are setting their house on fire. Zeha declares that for what he did, his penalty will be death. The two inside are terrified. Q asks why this is happening. The protagonist keeps trying to force the door open. He thinks they've been trapped from the outside. It's an ambush. There must be something here. He finds it. Anything in this house can be a weapon. He spots a bag and thinks, that's it. He grabs the bag and turns to the door. Q calls out for Michio, wanting to know what he's doing. The protagonist moves his legs swiftly. He kicks the door open, sending the thugs flying. The miners all shout that he's here, and Zeha tells them he's out, calling him an idiot. They need to surround him from all sides. The protagonist just readies himself for battle. He says it's him again, and asks what their objective is this time. Zeha questions this, asking if it isn't obvious. For the crime of humiliating, defying, and even injuring him, he will pay with his life. The protagonist says he understands. From now on, the hostile threat will be completely annihilated, but Zeha just tells him not to make him laugh. Q and his mother cough from the smoke. They soon notice the protagonist is crouched down. He gives them a finger signal, telling them to run when they see an opening. A miner charges with a knife, asking if he thinks he'll let him escape. But the protagonist grabs some rocks. The miner attacks with the knife, but is struck in the head as the protagonist dodges. Everyone is completely shocked. They wonder what he just did. A flail. That was the weapon the protagonist had made. It was improvised, made of leather and small stones. When swung to build momentum, it inflicts devastating damage upon hitting its target. Despite being easy to make, it was frighteningly powerful. This makes it a favorite among elite assassins. A lethal weapon built specifically to destroy the human body. Zeha is completely shocked. As everyone else is defeated, George tells him he's the last one left. Zeha says he's supposed to be just a kid. He charges, telling him not to fool him. However, the protagonist strikes his arm with the flail. The man screams from the devastating pain of a broken arm. He drops his knife to the ground. George walks towards his head. Zeha trembles in fear, but he lifts his head. He stares at the protagonist's expression of absolute hatred. He begs him to wait, saying there will be no penalty. But the protagonist replies that he's sorry, but anyone who threatens his life doesn't deserve to see tomorrow. Just then, Q grabs the protagonist's waist and begs him to stop. He says he can't take his life, that no matter how strong he is, killing someone is wrong. He screams at him not to become a murderer. Zeha starts running away in fear. The protagonist spins his flail, preparing to throw it while the boy holds him back. He hurls his improvised weapon. It only hits a post next to Zeha. The man looks back in terror. George wonders if he really missed. As Zeha gets away, groaning in pain, Q thanks God for being able to stop his friend. The protagonist mentally repeats the word murderer. Later, in a warehouse, Zeha is begging. He asks for permission to punish Michio. He says he beat him and swung a weapon like a madman with no sanity. A blonde man stands up saying that kind of behavior is unforgivable, and Zeha agrees, but he's suddenly struck in the face with a punch. The man replies that a local supervisor losing to a slave miner is utterly pathetic, and that calls for a beatdown level execution. Zeha cries, terrified of losing his life. After the brutal beating, the man pulls back his hand, which is armed with brass knuckles. He repeats Michio's name, and says it seems he's worth beating up a few more times. Later, in another house, Q comments on how seriously awful this is. He put so much effort into building that place, and it was destroyed in an instant. He asks what they're going to do now. The mother calls out to Michio, asking if he's really okay with staying there. George agrees, but it was just a deal to make things clear. He'll provide information on how the island is managed, the food supply system, and anything else because he wants to know everything. Q gets annoyed by this. He tells him to calm down and not talk like a stranger. Ever since he lost his memory, he's been acting strange, asking if his personality changed too. George mentally repeats the words, different person, and that maybe this kid is right because he used to be a soldier. But he suddenly lost his life to his own allies on the battlefield. There's probably something bigger behind all this. He won't let it end like this. He will definitely escape this island, and he will destroy every last one of those traitors. The next day, he's training outside. He starts doing push-ups, first with his left arm, then his right. George wonders if this is really all he's got. It feels like his muscle and core strength have to be rebuilt from scratch. A voice catches his attention. Masa approaches his friend. The protagonist thinks it's the guy from before, the one who handed him over to Zeha. Masa asks what he's doing, telling him he'll be late for the mine. The protagonist thinks to himself that this is a good chance to gather info. In the underground mine, a foreman orders everyone to line up. The subordinates gather and form a line. Two of them get annoyed when they see Michio. He thinks they must be Zeha's henchmen. The foreman announces he has an important announcement today. Zeha, the supervisor in charge of Team G, is dead. This surprises everyone. The director says the one who will replace him is number 8 from Team G, Masa. The young man just points to himself, questioning it. In the mine, they strike a rock with a pickaxe. Mining slaves are forced to do manual labor from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., working deep in the tunnels under harsh conditions. The environment is brutal and unforgiving. It's slave labor in every sense of the word, pure exploitation. One of the foremen says a man is too slow. He kicks him in the stomach, saying he's dragging them down. The man groans in pain on the ground. Masa puts a hand on his shoulder, saying the other team is the same as always. But here he's the local supervisor, and he won't hit anyone, so they can work at their own pace. The man gets emotional and calls out to Supervisor Masa. The young man comments that he looks exhausted and should rest a bit. Michio watches this from a distance. The other foreman interrupts, asking what kind of joke this is, cause he's just copying his lazy supervisor, and he really hates kind people. He asks if he wants to be disciplined right now, but a pickaxe hits his leg. The foreman yells that it hurts and asks what that was. George comments that his hand slipped, and he apologizes for it. The foreman approaches angrily, wanting to know what his problem is. Cause an apology won't cut it. It seems he's the one who needs some discipline. But a voice interrupts, saying they like this. The two turn around, surprised. The man talks about a fight, cause they can count him in. The miners call out to Kusanagi and comment that the foreman is screwed. The foreman replies that he would never dare challenge him and can't fight him. Kusanagi gets annoyed by this. Then he powerfully launches himself off the ground. He goes for a punch, commenting that if he won't listen, he should lose his life. He strikes him directly in the temple. The two are shocked by the punch. Masa shouts that it was insane power. Michio reflects that it's not just power. He hit a pressure point with extreme precision. Kusanagi turns and asks if he wants to be next, and if he's in the mood for a fight. Michio replies that he doesn't fight without reason, and Masa tells him to be respectful. Kusanagi repeats the name and says, so it's him. He was waiting to see him, and he leaps in his direction. Michio just gets into a fighting stance as the man comes toward him. Kusanagi throws a punch, which Michio blocks with his guard. All the miners are impressed by the flurry of punches. At this rate, Michio is going to die. The protagonist keeps defending relentlessly, thinking that he's too fast and heavy. Precise, too. Everything is top level, but he always leaves a lot of openings in his attacks. Michio plants his foot. He dodges to the side of his arm, surprising Kusanagi, and strikes his opponent's face. Everyone is shocked that he landed a punch on Kusanagi. Michio holds his ground. However, Kusanagi was able to block it and says it wasn't half bad. He's pretty funny. They're gonna beat each other until they lose all feeling. But a voice shouts for them to stop. Everyone turns, not understanding what's happening, but they quickly kneel on the ground, saying that Director Akichi has just arrived. The man keeps walking with a few miners behind him. He pushes his glasses up on his face. He is the director of the mine. Michio thinks he's the one in charge here. Akechi calls out to Kusanagi. The man immediately snaps to attention. Akechi tells him not to break the slaves with these pointless fights, and asks if he wants him to report this to the Marquis of the Blood Pact. Kusanagi trembles with fear upon hearing this. He then says he's put that thought aside, and this is just a small, educational guidance. Akechi says he calls it guidance, when all he does is punch. He shouldn't make him laugh, as no one expects intelligence from a blockhead like him. Kusanagi grumbles about this, and clenches his fist. Akechi asks what the slaves are doing, and if their job is to grovel on the floor, because they should be digging for every second they breathe, unless they want to be thrown out like trash. At 2 in the afternoon, it was lunch break. The protagonist thinks it's cold and tasteless. The other miners say it's not enough, and that the site supervisors have it so good. They get to eat like kings. He wishes he could try a lunchbox like that someday, just once. Then they fall to the ground, commenting on how hungry they are. Masa holds out his lunchbox to the protagonist. He tells him to eat it. Michio looks at the food without responding, but he says he doesn't want it, and Masa asks why. The protagonist replies that he doesn't intend to owe anyone. His friend sits next to him and says it's not about owing him. It's payback for that time he dragged him into trouble. When he fought Zeha, he blamed him. He was just a coward. So he can't just leave it like that. This is the least he can do. A smile spreads across Michio's face. He takes the chicken and says that for a lie, a piece of karag is pretty fair, and they're even, so he should hurry up and eat. But the other two approach from behind him, saying that if Michio doesn't want it, he should give it to them. Masa gives a piece to each of them. A few moments later, the director says they've been planning to sit around and eat for too long, so they should get up quickly and return to their posts. The mining slaves are forced to endure arduous physical labor. They have no human rights. One of the miners collapses to the ground. Masa tries to call out to him, asking if he's okay. He begs him to stay alive, but the foreman orders them to move. Masa is shocked by this. The man is kicked right after. The foreman touches his neck. He complains right before delivering the news. The man had lost his life. He was a member of Group G. Just throw him out. Masa tries to call out to his friend, telling him not to push himself so hard. Even after that, the grueling work didn't stop. The man orders them back to digging. A mere loss of life doesn't stop the work in this place. Human life was worth far less than trash. They leave his helmet on the ground. Michio looks back in anger. The man then rings a bell, announcing that the work for the day is over and they should put down their equipment. Masa sighs, saying it's finally over. But he notices Michio in front of him. He asks how he's still standing, and the protagonist replies that he's used to this level of strain. Masa wonders if this guy was always this tough. The foreman rings the bell, telling Group G to stop slacking off. After the mining is done, they are forced to strip and forced to walk naked while exhausted. The man orders them not to stop or slow down. To prevent the theft of ores, they are subjected to a full-body inspection. Only after that are they finally allowed to return to the surface. The foreman calls for Group 9. He announces that today's payment is ready. Michio thought to himself that it was 1,000 yen a day for 16 hours of work. One of the workers behind him gives thanks for the money, saying it makes him happy today too. Michio wondered how he could be so happy with such a small amount. Just then, a truck approached, and everyone got excited. The protagonist wondered what it was, as something was definitely coming. The other miners mentioned he was still there. Some women thanked the miners for their hard work today. They explained that because they worked so hard, they'll get a 20% discount on everything. Michio repeats the words, Mining Appreciation Day, but the other men are already running towards them, asking for a beer and a small bag of chips. Another woman also hands out some octopus snacks. Everyone keeps placing their orders without stopping. The man cracks open his beer and chugs it down. He sighed in bliss, commenting on how it hit every cell in his body. Another man remarks that Haida just doesn't get it, trying to save money on Appreciation Day. He calls it the peak of inefficiency, since he's going all in, drinking 1,000 yen's worth of pure indulgence. Michio mentally noted how strange it was. A few moments ago, they were all being treated like slaves, and now there's this sudden change in tone. Masa says it must be nice for everyone. Michio asks if he isn't going to get anything, but the young man replies that he definitely wants to, but he swore to save money until he gets the Paradise Pass. Michio questioned what that was, and Masa asked if he didn't remember. They were told about it when they first arrived. The director explained that from that day on, they were slaves, crawling on the earth. They were forced to work beyond their limits, earning just enough food to survive, living worse than cattle. But even in hell, money talks. If you wanted to grab the spider's thread, you had to save up 1 million yen. The Paradise Pass was what would guarantee their freedom to leave the island. Everyone cheered at the chance to escape, vowing to save their money for it. That man said he would see the outside world again, but he was the same one spending money on beer, saying he was back to life. Masa says that's when he made his decision. No matter how much he gets beaten or collapses from exhaustion, he won't spend a single yen. Michio thinks he understands now. Even in these hellish conditions, there's no rebellion because of 2 carrots dangled in front of them. One is the carrot of hope. The other is the carrot of pleasure, where people drown themselves and forget about hope. The mine officials and whoever is behind them know this, and it disgusted George to no end. The young man looks at his money. He asks how much more he needs for the Paradise Pass, and Masa questions why he's asking. He says he'd never tell him, but Michio tells him to relax, promising not to leak his information. He holds out the bill, saying he just wants to help him escape. Elsewhere, Michio says that means he has 60,000 yen left to go. Counting his salary, that's 2,000 yen a day, so he'll hit the goal in a month. Masa thanks him but wants to know why he'd go so far for him. Michio tells him not to worry about it, that they were doing this for him. More importantly, he wants to know if there are any boats, beaches, or docks on this island. Masa says no, and tells him to look for himself to see what it was really like. This island is surrounded by steep cliffs. That's common knowledge. The protagonist says he's going to check the place out. Masa warns that escaping is illegal and asks if he's crazy, but the protagonist questions if there are any laws in a lawless zone. But a sound interrupts his escape. The protagonist turns around and comes face to face with a drone. It was watching him, aiming a weapon at him. He realizes it's a military drone. The drone detects the monitor and acquires a route to the target. Michio starts climbing back up. Masa wonders what's happening. The protagonist makes it back to the top, yelling for him to run. Now! Masa asks what he's talking about, but a bullet grazes past him. The young man stares in shock. The two of them take off in a panicked sprint, driven by fear. That drone keeps firing relentlessly at them, but its shots only hit the ground as Masa screams. The chaos continued. The protagonist looks back, thinking that the drone was an SG Nemesis 1.0. It targets anything that moves within its detection radius. Once it locks onto a target, it considers it a threat and will hunt it to the end. Its nickname was Mad Stalker, a slaughter weapon that made even seasoned soldiers tremble. The shots get closer, and Masa wonders what's going on. Michio notices a bullet hit the wall. The protagonist plants his feet firmly on the ground. He turns to the side, and Masa comments that there's no way out. The protagonist just tells him to come with him. They continue through the forest. The drone hovers for a few seconds before pursuing them again. It moves sideways through some trees. Michio thinks, just as he expected. Its tracking capabilities are also highly specialized. He tells Masa to hurry up, as he's falling behind. The young man says he can't run anymore, but the protagonist tells him to keep going or he'll lose his life. This is bad. At this rate, they're going to get shot. Then, he spots a rat in a tree. The young man thinks, that's it, and approaches it, catching the rat in his hand. He announces he's going to count from 3, and when he's done, they have to stand perfectly still without moving a muscle. Masa asks if he's insane, yelling that they'll be filled with holes, but the protagonist starts the countdown. The young man tries to argue against it. The drone continues to fire non-stop. They leap over a rock and the drone keeps following. Finally, the countdown reaches 1. The protagonist apologizes to the rat and throws it toward the drone, hitting its camera. The machine turns, scanning the new target, then moves to the other side. Movement detected. Changing target. New route acquired. It aims at the rat and begins to eliminate it, riddling the poor creature, which had nothing to do with this, with bullets. Then it turns back towards them, but it stops just as quickly. The protagonist doesn't even flinch. The drone begins to circle the two of them, analyzing their faces. It makes a noise as it looks at Masa, but its trigger isn't pulled. It then turns to Mikio, doing the same to him. A bead of sweat drips down the protagonist's face. He was worried the drone would fire at him. The drop starts to fall, landing on a plant. The drone moves in front of them, then begins to fly upwards, announcing that the execution was complete. Masa collapses to the ground from the adrenaline rush, thinking he was finished. The protagonist just sighs, not reacting much. Masa wants to know what that thing was. Michio explains it was a drone developed by the Aldemir Republic, built purely for indiscriminate tracking and assassination. It can't distinguish between enemies and allies, so it was deemed a defective model and removed from wartime use. Masa asks if that thing is used in battle, and wonders how he knows so much about it. The protagonist wonders why, of all places, it was here. Its danger level is so high that selling or lending it to other countries is prohibited, so maybe the island he's on has a connection to the Aldemir army he used to serve in. Back at his house, Kyo calls out to the protagonist as his food burns. He says it took him a while, and his mother says he should say welcome back first. The protagonist asks what he's making, and Q replies that it's scrap soup, his special dish that he used to love. Now they can afford to eat better scraps, and he's thankful for it. Michio thinks about this for a moment. The boy says they should eat, because the food smells great. Michio puts the food in his mouth. He thinks that the acidity is intense and that this isn't safe for human consumption. Even military rations are better. Q says it's really good, and the protagonist wonders what this is. What kind of palate does he have? His mother explains that it was hard to even buy scraps on this island, so he grew up eating worse things as a child. Q says that earthworm udon was really good. He tells them to look, since there's even meat on the bone. It's their lucky day. He comments that this is heaven, and he tells the protagonist to pay up now. Michio asks what he means, but Q tells him to stop playing dumb and hand over the food money since he got paid. However, the protagonist replies that it's already gone. He gave it to Masa. The boy panics when he hears this. Michio says he plans to keep giving it to him from now on. The boy even drops his food in shock. He says it's Mikio's fault, and he sighs angrily because there was still a little left, but the protagonist puts the food on the table, saying he found a good use for it. He should take the leftovers and follow him. Q questions this statement. In a forest, he sees what's being done. He wants to know what he was planning with some scrap metal and a bucket. The protagonist says this is how he does it. Q complains that he threw his food away, but the protagonist denies it, saying he didn't throw it away. He was repurposing it for something else. Leftovers stink, and that makes good bait for wild animals. In other words, this should be enough to attract something. Q asks if he's setting traps and what they're going to hunt, but the protagonist says it'll probably be rats or another small animal. The boy says he was seriously considering eating rats, but heard about people dying from stomach problems afterward. Michio explains that city sewer rats carry diseases, but forest rats are valuable sources of protein. He asks if he doesn't like rats, then they'll walk a bit more. Q asks about more traps. He wants to know why they're bothering to put them in these bushes, and the protagonist says it's overgrown, which is why it works. The animals feel safe coming closer. Q gets excited by the scene. A bird was trapped on a tree, baited with a worm, becoming their next prey. Michio says this should cover lunch for tomorrow, and the boy agrees. At the administration building's mining site, a foreman reports that the week's total was 643 tons of ore, but 9 slaves had lost their lives. There were many losses, and most of them were likely due to malnutrition or overwork. He tells Director Akichi that even though they are slaves, they are still human lives, and they should increase food portions and breaks. Akichi cracks a smile, saying that headquarters doesn't care about human lives. Wishima tries to argue, but Akechi tells him that's enough and not to make him repeat himself. As long as production increases, his evaluation goes up, and he'll reach the top faster. He won't stay on this garbage-filled island forever, and he doesn't care how many slaves lose their lives. They'll keep using them since mining is the priority. Ueshima just says he understands, sir. Akechi says it's time for the next report. One of them reports that goods sold amounted to 2.5 million, with a 90% recovery rate. Those guys were eating and drinking like idiots again this week. Akechi replies that by chasing the carrot dangling in front of them, they fell into the trap and are no smarter than animals. He asks if there are any other reports. The man says yes. He heard that number 8 from Team G was aiming for the Paradise Pass. The others start laughing at the idea of a mining slave saving up 1 million yen, saying it's never happened before. Akechi smirks, repeating, number 8 from Team G. Masa then knocks on the door, asking if he's awake. The protagonist says he's right outside. Masa peeks his head out of the room. He's immediately surprised, because the protagonist is doing some exercises. He asks what he wants. Masa replies that he thought they were going to work together, and wants to know what he's doing. The protagonist comes down, asking if it isn't obvious. This body is too weak. If he wants to reach his goal, he needs to get even stronger. Masa replies that he's weird. Q wakes up and asks what that noise is so early in the morning. He notices Masa and asks who he is. The boy says he's Michio's co-worker. Q says so he's the one stealing his salary and must give it back because that's his food money. They were always hungry around there. Masa thinks about his past. His sister saying she was hungry. He asks if it's good, and his sister replies that it's delicious. She loves her big brother's toast. Masa thinks he wants to make it for them again, and he apologizes for it. The boy says he'll bring something good next time, so he should let it slide this once. Q agrees, but says it better be worth at least 1,000 yen. Michio puts on his shirt and walks in that direction. In the underground mining tunnel, Masa shouts that it's unstable and asks for cover. He says it's fine with just the 2 of them, so they can move safely. Ishizuka says he'll carry from this side. Akechi interrupts, saying that's good leadership. He takes safety seriously, just like the rumors said. Number 8 is impressive. Masa asks how he knows him, but Akechi says he's well known. He keeps the team in line without violence and as a result increases production, so he sees the rumors are true. Masa breaks into a smile, thanking the man, saying he's honored. Akechi says there's no need to be formal, as he came here for a reason, to give him a special bonus, since he's shown so much potential. A reward boosts motivation, and Wishima just sighs angrily. Michio notices this from a distance. Akechi says giving it to him in public is dangerous. You never know who's watching in a place like this, so he should come with him to a safer place. Masa asks if Michio heard that, saying maybe they can save for the Paradise Pass faster. The protagonist says he has a bad feeling about this, and that he should be careful. Masa replies that he's overthinking it and should just gratefully accept what's coming. Then he leaves, saying he's been waiting for this. Kusanagi says he's Michio, and if he's worried about his friend, he's throwing a party at his house right now. Michio keeps an angry expression nonetheless. Masa announces they're arriving at the house. This is his place, but it's too dirty for fine visitors like them. But the man says it's perfectly fine, and a sealed room works better for them. Masa says he's glad and tells him to come in. Apologizing, he says he'll make them some tea. He smiles and tells him to make himself at home. But Akechi complains immediately, saying it's dirtier than he imagined and his nose is going to rot. Masa is surprised by this. Akechi orders his subordinates to search now. They start rummaging through the boys' room. Kusanagi punches him in the stomach. Masa falls to the floor, coughing. Then one of the subordinates sits on his back and holds his arms. Masa asks who he is. Akechi says he was trying to buy a pass to Paradise, and he wants to know where the money is. He doesn't like to waste time. If he talks now, he'll only lose the money. Masa says, no way, the special bonus was a lie? Akechi says he's just confirmed that slaves are idiots. Masa realizes he's been tricked and says he has no money, as he's just a slave. Akechi comments that he still intends to waste his time, and orders his subordinate to get that, taking a pair of pliers from his pocket. Masa wonders what he's going to do, with the pliers gripping his tooth. The boy starts screaming and begs him to wait, but the tool moves to pull out his tooth. Akechi tells him to just do it, and so, Masa's tooth is pulled out. The boy writhes in agony. Akechi asks if he didn't tell him so. If he had just talked, he would have only lost his money. Now he must choose. Tell them where the money is, or lose something else. At the mine, everyone comments that foreman Masa hasn't returned yet. It seems that damn boss took a liking to him and is probably partying or something. Michio notices Washima approaching and thinks, this guy, he was with Akechi. Michio approaches, asking where foreman number 8 is. Washima says he doesn't know, but the protagonist wants to know what they're plotting. The man turns his face away without answering, telling him it's better not to get too involved. After all, you have a place to return to. At his house, Masa's screams can be heard. They keep pulling out his teeth, one after another. Then they pause for a moment to let Masa breathe. Akechi says if this continues, he'll never be able to eat again, so talking now would be the smartest move. Masa keeps saying he doesn't know. Akechi questions him, you won't say where the money is? Can't even make a simple decision like that? Fine, I'll show you some pity. He grabs another tooth with the pliers and brings them close to his mouth. Masa wonders what he was planning with this. Then they shove the pliers, with the tooth, into his mouth. Akechi says that his tooth was now back in place, and that was good for him. But now, they're going to perform the extraction and reimplantation again. Clapping his hands, he orders his subordinate to extract it once more, and then to implant the tooth again. He repeats the same command a few more times. The subordinate smiles sickeningly. Masa just agonizes as the director looks on happily. Hours pass and he's lost all the teeth in his mouth, so Akechi asks if he still wasn't in the mood to say where the money was. The young man breathes heavily. Remembering his sister, he decides he'll never give up the money because he needs to get off this island. His sister in the hospital apologizes, saying she bet the surgery cost was very high. But Masa had told her not to worry because he found a good job, and he was going to earn a lot to buy a souvenir for Yui. Masa thinks that if he doesn't go back, his sister will be all alone, and he can't let them take the money. Akechi gets annoyed by that look. He says he's just a slave and can't keep acting so tough because he's going to lose all his teeth. Masa replies that he has no money. Akechi gets angry, calling him a stupid, brainless piece of trash, but Kusanagi steps in, kicking his subordinate away. Akechi questions what he was doing. Kusanagi replies that he won't talk this way. The director wants to know what he would do. The blonde man grabs Masa's shirt and says he was just finishing what he started, and he has to say he was impressed. He then swings his fist with full force, hitting Masa's stomach without any mercy. The young man writhes in pain from his fractured rib. Kusanagi says that even after all that, he didn't talk, and that's what a real man is. That's what makes it fun to beat him. An overwhelming brute force that shatters bones in a single punch, and a violent nature that truly enjoys hurting others. The pain and fear were so intense that Masa wished he could beg to have his teeth pulled out instead. Kusanagi tells him to just lose his life now. Masa closes his eyes, thinking of his sister. Yui had said she didn't need any souvenirs and was just happy her brother was back. Then he's struck by the fist. Akechi says it looks horrible and it must hurt, and that if he just talks, Kusanagi will stop. But Masa is struck again in the face, remembering Yui saying she loves her big bro. The young man is thrown backward. Akechi tells him to just say where the money is, but Masa steadies himself on the ground, saying he doesn't have any money. Akechi replies that he was right then, and that Kusanagi could take his life. At the same time, Michio runs at full speed. He angrily throws the door open, but he's surprised by the scene. Masa was completely wounded on the floor. He just calls out his name. The protagonist is shocked. Masa continues to groan on the floor. Michio notices fractures from the 6th to the lower ribs. His breathing was abnormally fast, so the broken rib must have punctured his lung. Nasal bone and orbital fracture, in addition to multiple skull fractures, stab wounds and lacerations in his mouth with numerous lost teeth. Weak pulse with aortic damage and traumatic shock. No matter how severe it was, he wants to know what kind of person could do something like this. Masa says he was right about the warning, and that bastard wanted his money, but he decided to protect it until the end, and Michio replies that he understands. Masa says he won't be able to use the money anymore, so he's giving it to him. Michio says he doesn't accept favors so easily, and he should wait until he's healed to use it himself. But Masa grabs his hand. He tells him to just take the money. He knows he's dying, but if he doesn't give it to him now, the money will be lost. He needs to get closer to here. If he leaves this house and goes straight, he'll see a large tree with a gash in it near the coast. The money was buried in the ground. He worked so hard to save that money, but he's giving it all away, and in return, he has one request. When he gets off this island, he has to find his sister. Michio asks about his sister. Masa just remembers her wishing him a happy birthday. He says she had cut the fabric from her own skirt, even though it was her favorite. Yui replied that she just wanted to give it to him because he always worked so hard. Back in the present, Masa says she's a good girl, so please, he must find her. Michio says he can't make that promise, but Masa grabs his arm and begs, saying her name is Yui Honjo, and if he finds her, he must tell her that her dumb big brother never forgot her, not until his very last moment. Then he thanks him for everything. He loses his life right after. The protagonist looks at the young man, then he places a hand on his forehead, finally closing his eyes. Masa's tears fall as he remembers his sister. The protagonist walks out of the house with the body in his arms, heading straight ahead without thinking, to the tree he had indicated. The protagonist begins to dig with effort, pulling a box from the ground. He takes out several bills saying Masa's name and that he had accepted the money. Then he removes the ribbon from his arm, unwrapping what was left of it, and saying he'll take this too, to hide his face. Akechi thanks him for showing them the way, and he had finally lost his life. He was a rare kind of idiot who suffered for nothing, losing both his money and his life, a fitting end for a useless piece of trash. So he says that either way, this slave must hand over that dirty money. Michio just stands up, saying he refuses the offer. Akechi says that just as he thought, slaves are all fools, and he's no different from that piece of trash. Then he orders his subordinates to take the money from him. The protagonist also lunges forward with a punch, dodging a blow from one of them and countering with a strike to his face. He does the same with his elbow to another subordinate. The third one comes at him again, but gets an uppercut to the chin, falling hard to the ground, unable to react. Michio says he was entrusted to manage this money by Masa. It's war funds, and if their plan is to take it, then he'll have to remove them. The subordinate gets up with a bloody nose, and Akechi pulls something from his jacket, saying they were all useless. He raises a finger, then points the pistol. The protagonist is on alert, but Kusanagi grabs his hand, saying he would stop if he were him, since it's not worth wasting a bullet, and that they'll finally finish what they started. Michio doesn't answer, but remains ready for combat. Akechi tells him not to take too long, and Kusanagi agrees. Both fighters then assume their combat stances. Kusanagi quickly advances toward the protagonist, attempting a series of strikes that are always dodged. Michio notes that he was a boxer with serious training too. Kusanagi prepares a cross, saying he has nice footwork, but dodging won't win him the fight. However, the protagonist dodges and prepares a counterattack, landing a blow to the opponent's liver. The protagonist just sighs angrily. Akechi cracks a smile. Kusanagi praises the good liver shot, saying it was good enough to feel like a massage. Kusanagi prepares to counterattack. The protagonist also tries to defend with his arms, but the attack sends him flying. Michio is surprised by the impact he took. Akechi reflects that no matter how good a cat's maneuvers are, it can't win against a tiger. The protagonist advances once more, delivering several blows to Kusanagi's face. Akechi thinks he's agile, but that level of attack can't stop Kusanagi. Michio prepares to defend once again, letting the fist strike his arms. He's thrown back once more. Michio steadies himself on the ground and notices he's on the edge of the cliff. The rocks there fall into the sea. Kusanagi advances, asking if he thinks he can turn this around just by keeping his guard up, and that he's too naive. His fist approaches right after, but the protagonist dodges to the side, preparing his own fist, and so he lands a perfect punch on the chin. He hits the other side next. Michio keeps a serious expression, but Kusanagi laughs, saying he's better than he thought, and that he was really making this fun. This is how a fight should be. The protagonist then ducks down. Kusanagi notes that it was a counter-attacking stance again, and not a bad one. However, there was something different, so he stops his fist in front of him, moving his foot since he wasn't just punching. Akechi thinks this slave was reading Kusanagi like a veteran boxer, and he was right, but he also has a powerful kick. The protagonist then moves his arms, defending the kick with his stance as well. Kusanagi is surprised by this move. Then the protagonist pulls him in for a takedown, knocking his large opponent to the ground. Akechi is completely stunned by this too. The protagonist traps him in a jujitsu hold. Kusanagi asks how he read him, but the protagonist explains that he had a low center of gravity and a stable lower body that didn't move up or down, the traits of a kickboxer. Then he lands an elbow to his face. Kusanagi groans in pain. Then the protagonist moves in once more. The man flashes a wide grin, grabbing Michio's neck, and then squeezes with all his might, saying it wasn't bad, but he got too close. He then reverses the hold, saying that if this were a martial arts match, but it wasn't a match. What they were doing now was a no-rules brawl. He continues to squeeze the protagonist's neck. Akechi wonders when the last time he saw Kusanagi get serious was. Slave revolts had happened many times in the past, and plenty of martial artists were confident in their skills, but none of them ever managed to defeat Kusanagi. He's a brawler who doesn't follow rules. There's no way he'd lose to a mere fighter. Kusanagi says it's a refined martial art, but there's no way it can beat him. The protagonist moves once again, striking his opponent's chin with his palm. He then grabs Kusanagi's arm. The big man thinks that this guy used his palm to create the necessary space to pivot his legs. Michio puts him in an arm lock and throws him to the ground with full force. Akechi is startled by this. The protagonist then begins to twist his arm, repeating what he'd said, that this was a brawl. Kusanagi is even more surprised to hear this. The protagonist continues to twist his arm. The big guy starts to scream in pain as his arm is slowly broken, until it's completely twisted by the protagonist. Kusanagi groans with with even more pain. The protagonist gets on top of him, saying not to get him wrong. This was supposed to be a brawl, but it doesn't even count as one. It was a pure one-sided defeat on his part. The strongest man in Aldemir's elite unit, Ghost, George Sai. Despite his unparalleled fighting ability, he had never experienced a brawl. Kusanagi moves quickly, saying this was interesting. The protagonist just looks at his two fingers, then breaks them with his forehead. Kusanagi groans in even greater pain. George had only experienced fights for his life, so he moves quickly with his elbow, like a hammer coming down on his opponent's face. George Sai had experienced nothing but this, so the protagonist misses his punch. Kusanagi pants, filled with extreme fear, and thinks that this guy, if he were a normal person, he would hesitate at the moment he needed to take a life. But this guy was completely different. He was calm, efficient, and confident. The protagonist moves his fist once more. Kusanagi tries to defend himself, thinking he's really trying to take his life. The blow breaks through his defense, hitting his trachea with full force. Kusanagi immediately starts to cough, thinking that this guy in front of him was not a fighter, and definitely not a brawler. This couldn't be right. He was a professional at taking lives. Kusanagi suffers on the ground, thinking he uses the same martial art as George Sai, a veteran soldier, Krav Maga, which is used by special forces in several countries, the world's strongest combat technique. The protagonist picks up a rock from the ground. He raises it high and approaches his face, bringing it down with all his strength, without hesitation. But a voice stops him from taking his life. Q had told him he should never do that, so he wouldn't become a murderer. So he gives up, tossing the rock away. It falls deep into the sea. The protagonist then gets up, but he starts to hear laughter. Kusanagi gets up, saying that this is good. This was what he was looking for, and they'll fight until they lose their lives. The protagonist then raises his guard, but he's surprised by what happens next. Dodging a shot that hits Kusanagi, the protagonist moves closer to the edge of the cliff. Kusanagi wonders about this as blood gushes from his chest. The protagonist holds on at the edge, sighing with exhaustion afterward. Akechi complains that he missed, but at least he can punish a loser. Kusanagi gets even angrier at this. Akechi tells him not to get angry, because it's only natural for a useless mutt who couldn't even defeat a slave to be discarded. The brute gets even madder, running towards his boss. Akechi keeps shooting, telling the damn dog not to move. He shoots him, but Kusanagi doesn't stop. Akechi fires once more, hitting his ribs and arm, but he thinks it's impossible, and wonders why he won't stop. Kusanagi closes in with a punch and tells him to go to hell. Akechi gets even more irritated, shooting the brute in the forehead. His fist finally stops in front of his face, and he starts to fall to the ground, landing at Akechi's feet. The director starts to laugh non-stop. Then he kicks his face, saying he was a persistent mad dog who finally died, and continues to stomp on Kusanagi's body. He asks how long his other subordinates are going to stand around and tells them to get up. Kusanagi lost his life to the slave who stole the weapon, and they must tell this to the blood-packed knights. But now, beyond that, the one responsible for taking Kusanagi's life must be punished. Michio just looks back. Akechi aims the gun, saying he praises him because his combat skill is wonderful. But no matter how strong he is, a single man can't win a war. In modern society, what matters are brains and guns. Michio raises his hands. Akechi is surprised by this, but a sick smile spreads across his face. He says that naturally, anyone would be intimidated by a gun, and asks if he's going to surrender. The protagonist doesn't answer him. Akechi continues, saying he'll take his life because he'll pay dearly for the wasted time and bullets. He approaches him with long strides, saying that running to a dead-end cliff was a mistake, but the protagonist says everything went as planned. Akechi questions what that sound is, but the military drone rises above them. Akechi asks what that is, and the protagonist looks up. The director keeps asking about the Mad Stalker. His soldiers wonder if that's a small aircraft. One moves forward but ends up getting shot in the head, falling to the ground immediately after. Akechi is surprised by this, noticing the lifeless person on the ground. His colleagues also panic now. The stalker prepares to fire again, while the other two run away. Their movement is detected, and the target is locked for pursuit, with the intention of eliminating the target. Michio keeps repeating that it's the Mad Stalker. It intensely tracks anything that moves, and the men cry out for someone's help. The drone moves a little more. It eliminates people without fail. Akechi keeps aiming at Michio's head. The protagonist thinks that this man, he hasn't moved since the drone appeared, and wonders if that means he knows about the Mad Stalker. The two stare at each other without saying a word, but the drone moves towards them. Akechi sighs, even angrier. He thinks that he lured them to the mad stalker and wonders how a slave would know about it. It doesn't matter now. This guy crossed the line, so he has to go to hell. Mikio says that if he knows how the drone works, then he also knows if he pulls that trigger, he'll be one of the ones to get shot. Akechi is completely stunned to hear this. The drone turns towards the two of them. Akechi thinks he's bluffing because that small movement won't trigger it. The protagonist says to go ahead and test it, then he'll know for sure if it's a bluff. The director hesitates to act. The protagonist asks if he's going to hurl insults as usual, but in the end, he's too scared to even move his mouth now. Akechi says he's going to take his life for insulting him, a crime punishable by death. Moving a finger a few centimeters should be safe, but the drone buzzes near him. Akechi still wonders how it will react. The drone moves a little more. Michio thinks it's true, but he's not sure if it will trigger a response. All he can do now is wait. Soon, the crazy stalker will think the job is done and disappear. When that happens, he'll dodge the bullets and take him down without any mercy. The drone stops between the two of them. The director trembles while cursing at him, wondering what he should do now. The night wears on, with a wind blowing towards them, making their hair sway. The drone moves quickly to the side. Akechi cracks a smile, thinking this is his chance. He fires at the protagonist repeatedly without stopping. One of the bullets hits his arm, forcing him to move. The drone detects the movement. The protagonist is now locked on for pursuit. He moves quickly and starts to run. That drone aims to eliminate the target, firing at the protagonist as he runs. Mikio heads towards the cliff. He gets hit once more. He then leaps high into the air, heading for the cliff this time. The drone beeps a few more times, shooting the protagonist in the thigh. The protagonist feels the pain immediately. Akechi grins. He fires another shot into the same spot. The protagonist starts to fall uncontrollably. He screams out, but then realizes his situation. He does a quick sit-up in midair, jumping safely this time, and so he falls into the water. The drone continues to pursue him. It moves forward, still shooting, firing even into the water. The protagonist gets hit a few more times, groaning in pain. The drone then starts to circle. The protagonist dives even deeper. The pursuer beeps once more, signaling that the execution was complete. Akechi is surprised by this. He approaches the edge of the cliff, saying he thinks he's dead. Then he laughs, because a mere slave dared to challenge him. He laughs even more manically after that. Back at the cliff, the protagonist starts to surface. He wonders if they're gone. Then he feels a sharp pain, noticing the heavy bleeding from his leg. He takes the gag from his mouth and ties it around his leg. He reflects that he was caught off guard, and the bullet is still inside him. He needs to remove it and treat the wound somehow. The blood begins to spread. The protagonist moves. Something in the water heads towards him. Michio wonders if something is coming. It could be a predator. The shark charges at him. Mikio is completely stunned, but he dodges the shark's bite, wondering if it smelled his blood. What appeared before Michio's eyes was the top predator of the marine food chain, a great white shark. Its torpedo-like shape moves through the ocean at 50 kilometers per hour. A single bite easily exceeds a ton of force. The protagonist dodges another bite, losing his breath, but the shark's tail was approaching, striking the protagonist as he tries to avoid it. Mikio thinks this is bad. He's lost a lot of air, but the shark circles around him. Mikio returns to the surface, catching his breath as the shark comes back around. He prepares himself once more, descending back into the water. He opens his arms wide, staying still in front of the shark. They are ambush predators. They hate being noticed by their prey. He emanates a killing intent, willing the shark to disappear, but his wound is still bleeding. The shark senses it and opens its mouth, charging toward him. The protagonist thinks it smelled his blood. He needs to aim for the vital points. What Michio was aiming for was the tip of the shark's nose, the ampullae of Lorenzini, its special sensors. It was a shark's weak spot. The protagonist wonders if it worked, but the shark keeps advancing, hitting his stomach. Then the creature lunges at him with its mouth open. Michio thinks it didn't work. There's too much of a difference in their physical strength. He falls back into the water again, suffering from the pain in his body. He goes to the surface to catch his breath. Michio wants to know where the shark is, but the animal was coming from behind him. Mikio turns in surprise. The shark opens its mouth, tearing off a piece of his clothes. The protagonist tries to catch his breath, but in front of the ocean's greatest predator, human strength is useless. He realizes he's running out of air. He's slowly losing consciousness. There was no other way, so if this is the end, again, he's happy with it. He won't pathetically cling to life. He finally loses consciousness. But a voice tells George Sai to wake up. A woman tells him to promise that no matter what happened, he would come back alive. The protagonist wakes up, thinking of Sophia. He grabs the shark's sides, climbing onto it. The protagonist thinks he's going to break his promise again. That would be too pathetic this time. He reverts to his George mentality. Moving with his fist, he punches the shark. The protagonist continues with his determination, relentlessly punching the creature. The shark gets angry. The size difference was insane, and the water resistance was reducing the force of his attacks. Even aiming for the weak spot on its nose didn't work. There's no way to harm the king of the oceans. Not like this. So the protagonist pulls the cloth from the shark's teeth. He moves away, going behind it. He grabs onto the shark's gills, using them to move with it. The protagonist applies force to its gills. He strikes with all his might. Inside the shark's body was a different story. He wonders if it liked that, how it felt to have its insides torn apart. The protagonist shoves his hand in there. The shark starts to panic, thrashing from side to side. Mikio thinks he won't let it shake him off. He puts in as much strength as he can. He pulls an organ out from inside. The shark starts to sink. Michio realizes he's out of air. The protagonist climbs to the surface, taking the deepest breath he can. He slowly recovers. The shark surfaces behind him. Mikio turns, wondering if it's still coming. The shark charges at him. The protagonist panics. The shark opens its mouth, coming right for him, using its last ounce of strength. The protagonist doesn't react, but the shark collapses in front of him, sinking into the ocean. It goes down to the seabed. The protagonist breathes heavily as the adrenaline wears off. He looks up once more and thinks that Sophia saved him, but it seems he's been dragged far out into the ocean. He needs to get back to the industrial waste island quickly and treat these wounds. Then, the protagonist loses consciousness, left helpless in the sea. He gets up a moment later, coughing. He thinks he's out of energy. He was very cold and had lost a lot of blood. He wonders if he can really make it back in this condition, but a light shines on his back. The protagonist turns around. He sees the sun rising on the horizon. He says it's already morning. He notices a branch next to him. He thinks that's a good sign. He swims over and grabs onto it. He climbs onto the branch to rest. He lies there, trying to recover, breathing heavily. The protagonist grits his teeth, looking at the sky as the sun rises higher. He turns over, thinking that he survived again. The water laps at the surface. The protagonist is now on an island. He thinks it's been about 5 hours since he was shot. He needs to get the bullet out and treat the wound quickly, but he loses consciousness again, his head hitting the ground. He thinks this is bad. His body temperature is dropping. Something approaches from above him. The protagonist wonders if it's an enemy, since his body won't move. The person asks if he can hear them and if he knows his name. The protagonist starts to think about it. When he was George Sai, he was at a shooting range, repeating the action over and over, always hitting the center of the head, until a voice calls for George. A blonde young man asks if it's really him. He introduces himself as Rory, the new recruit for the Ghosts, and says it's a pleasure to meet him. George walks right past him and apologizes, but says he doesn't do small talk. The young man looks down in silence. He says that his father and mother lost their lives to terrorists. The one who avenged them was him, the warlord, and he wants to be as strong as him, shouting that he was his hero. The protagonist looks back, surprised, but he replies that he had simply carried out his mission. Rory is stunned to hear this. A few days have passed since then. They are attacked by the terrorist unit's artillery, suffering multiple casualties, so they need treatment now. Some medics take him away, saying he has a level 7 consciousness with a blood pressure of 40/80, so they begin to treat the soldiers. A doctor says George's shoulder is injured, but he tells him to leave it since it's a minor wound, but a familiar voice calls his name. Rory, wounded on a stretcher, asks if he's okay too. George tells him to stop talking. Sophia shouts that it's a massive abdominal wound from a large caliber fragment, with a confirmed pelvic fracture. Rory thinks that he couldn't be like him after all. The protagonist is left speechless. The young man says he doesn't want to die, that he's afraid of the Reaper. George says everyone dies in the end. There's nothing to be afraid of. Life or not, it means nothing. Sophia says if he can move, he should help carry the stretcher to the surgical center and apply pressure with this gauze. Then she tells him to hurry because they're short-staffed. Sophia introduces herself as a military doctor and says they will save everyone. A few moments later in the operating room, they announce that his vital signs are dropping. Sophia yells that a good doctor doesn't shout in front of a wounded patient. If he were her patient, she wouldn't let him die. George is impressed by this, looking down with determination. Dusk settles in. Other nurses comment on how incredible she was, that Sophia really saved everyone. So the rumors are true. She became a doctor at 17 and worked in war zones. George thinks, so that was the doctor's name. But Sophia taps his shoulder with a bottle, saying this is a bribe. She asked for help from a non-medical person, which could get her in trouble. If he says anything, she'll be screwed. She then takes a sip from the bottle and celebrates, saying it was awesome. George is surprised by this. He asks if Rory will pull through, and Sophia replies that it's hard to say if the chances are good, but she's seen people make miraculous recoveries many times before. George asks if she doesn't think it's all pointless. Even if she does everything to save them, the soldiers will just go back to the front lines again, and he wants to know if it isn't futile. Sophia replies that even so, she still wants to save lives. She takes another drink. Just then, a doctor approaches, calling for them, shouting that Rory has regained consciousness. Sophia is happy to hear it, so the two of them head over. She asks Rory how he feels and if it hurts. The young man says yes, and Sophia tells him not to be in such a hurry to die. George is surprised by this, thinking about him saying he didn't want to die, and then about Sophia saying she still wants to save lives. The girl breaks into a smile, and the protagonist thinks for a few moments. Sophia examines his shoulder, removing the bandage. She says he's been taking good care of it, as the swelling has gone down and there's no sign of infection. It's fully healed. Then she asks if he can buy her a drink as thanks for the treatment. George asks what kind of penalty this is, and Sophia wants to know why drinking with her is a penalty. Everyone shouts that they've gotten close recently and must have already kissed, and they say they want to buy Sophia a drink. Besides, the warlord is more laid back than he looks. The girl sighs right after. Just then, Rory calls for George, saying he has made up his mind. He's leaving the Phantoms. George replies that it's a serious decision, and with his skill set, he'd never make it out. Rory replies that he's probably right. Sophia saved him just now, so he owes his life to her. Honestly, he didn't expect this. He thought squads like this would be crueler. The protagonist thinks that he felt the same way, and had never experienced an atmosphere like this before, and she was the one who made it happen. Even on the battlefield, laughter can echo. Soldiers have their moments of peace. But for George Tsai, this could be his final moment of rest. A few days after all this, Sophia asks what happened. Beck says it was cardiac arrest, and that she has to bring the guy back to life no matter what. Sophia replies that she understands, and they need to take him to the surgical center now. George notices this from a distance, watching the body being carried past. He notices a wound on the forehead, but he remains silent about it. Outside the center, the protagonist thinks that this burn scar was caused by some kind of high electrical voltage being forced through the body. He then asks if the enemy from before was a spy from a hostile nation, and Beck says he's as sharp as ever. The protagonist says he always gets information from them at the last second, but inducing cardiac arrest just for that doesn't fit his style. Beck says it was Ryan, the electrical ops guy, who messed everything up. He was in charge, so it's his fault. George asks if he wants him revived then, and Beck says there's still a ton of information he wants to get out of him. The protagonist wants to know who he was. Beck hesitates for a moment, but he reveals that he's a financier and arms dealer, an underworld titan named Saeed Arash, a high-ranking executive of Ignition. The protagonist is stunned. Clenching his fist tightly, he thinks of Ignition. For 16 years, George had never forgotten that name, not even for a moment. Back when George was just Joji, the boy asks to eat that fruit, and his father follows him, saying that they'll give it a try. A family trip to the Republic of Aldemir, the only time his workaholic father ever took them anywhere. It was only 5 short days, but for Joji, it was supposed to be a completely irreplaceable memory, or at least it should have been. Everyone runs after the explosion of a terrorist attack. On that day, a random attack occurred, killing and injuring more than 200 people. His father tells him to hurry and get as far away as he can. George looks at his father, who was lifeless on the ground. He tries to pull his sister's arm, but ends up falling backward, still holding her arm in his hands. The Japanese news reported 2 national losses and 1 missing person, but the boy would never understand. The president of the Republic of Aldemir made a statement about the attack. Today, we declare this an act of war. They have taken many of our lives, and they are the worst kind of terrorists, but we will never forget the name of the organization called Ignition. Back in the present at the training center, Beck says that for 16 years since the attack, they've never been able to get a lead on Ignition's trail, but they've finally found their hideout. George gets angry at this. Beck says orders will be coming soon, but he's telling him now. His next mission is the operation to annihilate Ignition. The protagonist thinks that he was weak back then, but he's not that child anymore. He has waited so long for this moment. Beck's radio starts to crackle. Central tells him to answer because it's bad, and the leader asks what's going on. The soldier reports that Saeed has disappeared, and so has Sophia. Beck asks if she disappeared too, and George is surprised to hear this. In the forest, the girl is breathing heavily. Outside the military camp's grounds, but Sophia stumbles and falls, hitting her head. Saeed says there's no time to stop, and that she must get up and keep moving. Sophia tells him not to be ridiculous, and to at least let her treat it, but the knife gets closer to her face. Saeed says they are far from the camp's perimeter, which means she is no longer important to him as a hostage. So the two of them keep walking. Saeed keeps the knife pointed at her. The girl swallows hard. But a click comes from Saeed's molar. He says the landing coordinates are J9 and that it's a bit tight, but he can make it down. Sophia thinks it's a transmitter hidden in his molar and wonders how many devices are implanted in him. A few hours earlier, she had decided to place the patch to monitor his vital signs. It's been a long time since his heart stopped, and in cases like this, revival is unfeasible, wondering how he was reviving. This doesn't make sense because they haven't even started treatment yet, and maybe he never had a heart attack to begin with. Sophia turns and says the man is still alive, but blood splatters on her face. Sophia watches the scene in fear. Saeed takes his nurse's life. The woman coughs, while his expression remains serious. Sophia is now in a full-blown panic, but Saeed tells her not to scream because he has a heart rate suppressor implanted in his chest. He has suppressed his heartbeat to undetectable levels unless she uses precise equipment. A very convenient device right now, but it has a downside that causes terrible nausea after use. Sophia becomes even more scared. Saeed says to please not scream, since when someone wakes up in a bad mood and hears screams, it makes them want to take someone's life. Besides, he planned to use her as insurance to escape this base and will take her hostage. He asks if she will come with him, but says he won't force her, pointing the knife at her face. Because if he doesn't have insurance, it's not really a problem for him. Sophia starts crying. Back in the present, she thinks about the Ignition terrorist group. Their technology is far more advanced than she expected, but that's not the worst part. What was truly terrible was their cold-blooded willingness to implant devices in human bodies to achieve their goals. And their brutality, taking lives as if they were nothing. It was kill or be killed. The girl thinks she has one chance, and that's all she has. As someone who operates on the battlefield, she always keeps certain drugs on her. Morphine, for example, she had in her pocket. It was a potent sedative analgesic. It removes pain and suffering, but even a small overdose can induce a coma. The morphine she carries is highly concentrated, and 2 milligrams could cause unconsciousness. If she injects the full 10 milligrams, it will definitely take his life. So they keep walking forward. A bird remains on a branch, but it turns its head upward. A sound starts to approach them. Sophia thinks this is the moment. With maximum speed, she moves her needle, stabbing it into the man's neck. Saeed is surprised by this. Sophia keeps pressing down, emptying the syringe. Saeed then loses consciousness. The girl is surprised by this, until the man falls to the ground. She breathes a cold sigh as the adrenaline subsides, staring at the body trembling there. She thinks that maybe 10 milligrams was too much, but Saeed moves his hand once more, grabbing the girl's neck right after. He mentions the injected morphine. He says it wasn't a bad plan, but he can build up a resistance to drugs this way, and she should know that. If you overdose repeatedly since childhood, that's what happens. And Sophia thinks it's insane. Saeed says it's been a long time since he had morphine, and it feels pretty good, so he thinks he will dismantle her now. No analgesics left, by the way. She used it all on him, so it's her fault. Then he touches his chest, saying that a life is only borrowed. Sophia is confused by this attitude. Saeed continues, saying that the soul is only entrusted. Then he calls out to his lord, asking him to take them, and then he cuts Sophia. The girl closes her eyes in fear, but then she looks down, seeing that he had only torn her clothes. She gasps, even more afraid. But Saeed touches her face, telling her not to be afraid because fear settles in the flesh. For example, if cattle feel fear before being slaughtered, the meat becomes tough. That's the stress hormone at work. The color of the meat darkens, the texture hardens, and the taste deteriorates. It's a complete waste. After caring for it so lovingly for 2 or 3 years, for a prized meat to become ugly and horrible. He then begins to cry while still holding Sophia by the neck. Saeed sighs, catching his breath. He wipes his tears, telling her not to be scared, because he will cut silently and as gently as possible. Then he asks her to smile, and Sophia just thinks that he's a monster. The knife then approaches her. The woman keeps thinking that he was a monster in human skin. Then the blow comes closer to her. Sophia just closes her eyes in fear, but blood drips to the ground, and Saeed drops the knife, falling into the grass. Sophia is surprised by this. Saeed's hand now had a hole in it. He looks at her in surprise and puts his hand over his eye, seeing that the shot had also hit a rock. Saeed panics, thinking it's a sniper. Sophia thinks it might be a rescue. From a distance, George waits, holding a sniper rifle in his hand and ready to shoot again, aiming at him once more. He then fires another shot. The bullet approaches Saeed. The man ducks, the shot grazing his ear. He slams Sophia's back onto the ground. Then he says, "It's from the 2 o'clock direction." The sound delay was 2 seconds, so they must be about 700 meters away. Another shot follows. Saeed says the coordinates are confirmed. Then he wonders how many enemies there are. Since the radio was too quiet, he should be picking up something. The enemy might be just a lone sniper out there, so he starts relaying the information to the others. Sophia thinks that now is her only chance, escaping his grasp right after. But Saeed kicks her leg, asking where she thinks she's going, because her job is to be his human shield. Then he stabs her with the knife, saying that abandoning her post was not acceptable. His molar makes another click. Saeed asks if they heard there's a sniper at coordinates E13, on the middle of the hill in a grove of saber trees, an unlucky enemy betrayed by the morning sun. So, exterminate every insect without exception. The helicopter starts to move. Saeed questions if she thinks a coward who shoots from afar is strong. They have spotters, food deliverers, and people to cover their escape. just so he can stay alive a little longer. If they miss a shot, their position is exposed and their attack power is nullified. He starts ranting that a coward who comes alone to rescue her will be found among the bodies soon. A lone sniper is just someone waiting to be hit, but George comes down from the tree, saying he completely agrees. Saeed turns around, startled, but ends up with his head rolling in the air, and so his headless body falls to the ground. George says they shoot on purpose to make them think they're in that direction, so they won't realize they're switching to close quarters combat. Sophia cries with happiness upon seeing George, and the protagonist says it went just as planned, thanking her for finding their position. It seems someone used the morning sun to their advantage. Saeed, even without a head, is surprised, but George says that unfortunately he isn't as good as a sniper. Approaching the young woman, he asks if Sophie is okay down there. With wide eyes, she stares at him and lets out a small whimper of pain. Suddenly, she starts crying loudly, catching him off guard. He asks her not to make any noise because there might be enemies nearby, but she ignores him and hugs him tightly, saying she was scared. Caught by surprise, he remembers a piece of advice from an old friend. The scene shifts to a flashback where his friend says, "This is the moment a man shows his worth." In that conversation, the friend advises that he should just hold her in silence. To finish, he says, if all goes well, she might even give herself to him. Back in the flashback, he calls his friend's advice utter nonsense. He tells his friend to focus on strategies instead of fantasies. Returning to the present, he remembers the advice to just hold her silently. He recalls his friend's distorted view of the situation. Stopping for a moment, he looks down with a very worried expression. He wonders if placing his hand on her back would look like he has ulterior motives. While he hesitates, the girl continues to cry desperately in his arms. Not knowing how to act, his hand stays frozen in the air, completely indecisive. Despite being a combat genius known as the Warlord, he was utterly hopeless in anything that didn't involve a fight. Clinging to him, she keeps crying and squeezes him tighter. Completely uncomfortable, he is left speechless by her sudden proximity. Then, a loud sound from the sky catches their attention. Looking up, he spots a helicopter approaching rapidly. Shouting for her to get down, he throws her to the ground to protect her. Firing non-stop, the helicopter completely corners them in the forest. To keep her safe, he dives with her behind a rock. He realizes the enemy soldiers have finally found his location, but a shot hits his leg, making him lament that everything is lost. Without a second thought, he picks her up and starts running. Being carried so suddenly, she screams in confusion and asks him to wait. He just yells back, telling her to hold on tight. As he runs, he warns her not to make a sound. Reaching the edge of a cliff, he simply jumps with her in his arms. In a panic, she lets out a desperate scream during the freefall. Together they plummet toward the river rushing below. From up high, the fall feels endless until they hit the water. He holds her tight, bracing them both for the inevitable impact. From the shock, her eyes close and she eventually faints. After some time, she slowly opens her eyes and groans. Sitting by the riverbank, she finally seems to be recovering from the scare. She looks around in silence, processing what happened. Carrying a pile of firewood, he appears and asks if she's awake. He mentions he's going to start a fire and tells her to rest. A bit embarrassed, she says yes, confirming she is okay. He explains he followed the river, likely losing the enemies who were tracking them, saying they need to regain their energy. He warns they will be leaving soon. He calculates it will take about half a day's walk to reach the camp. With a slight smile, she interrupts and simply thanks him for his help. Looking at the water, he says he only did what was natural. She seems a bit flustered by his response and covers her mouth. Trying to help, she stands up and offers to gather food or wood, but suddenly, her expression shifts to total shock. As she turns around, she notices his body and stands there completely paralyzed. Noticing her fixed stare, he also becomes quite embarrassed by the situation. Taking a step back, she hugs herself and lets out a cry of shame. Her foot trips on a branch on the ground. Losing her balance completely, she falls forward toward him. Upon impact, she complains of pain with her eyes tightly shut. Opening them, she realizes she ended up falling right on top of him. Caught off guard, he is shocked by the position they've ended up in. She wonders what she should do in such an awkward situation. She tells herself her strength seems to be fading away. Completely drained, she ends up leaning her body against his on the ground. Trying to control himself, he remembers he is a soldier and must resist. As they get closer, their faces nearly touch. He realizes he can no longer stop what is about to happen. Unable to resist any longer, he pulls her in, and they kiss. The two finally give in to the moment. They're in the middle of the forest, but a sudden noise interrupts everything, putting them both on high alert. In a swift move, he yells for her to get down and shoves her to the ground. Immediately after, he draws his weapon and aims it into the darkness of the woods. With a focused expression, he keeps his aim steady, ready for any threat. Behind him, she just watches the scene unfold, waiting to see what happens. Suddenly, a small squirrel scurries out from the bushes. Seeing the animal, he realizes it was just a false alarm. Lowering his gun, he tells her not to worry, that they don't need to be on alert. But as he turns around, he notices something and looks a bit confused. They stand in silence for a moment, just looking at each other, not knowing what to say. A bit embarrassed, she apologizes for what just happened between them. Turning his back, he says she must have been confused by everything. He explains that it's a reaction to stress, causing confusion and irrational actions. Saying she's just tired, he suggests she go back to sleep. Hearing his explanation, she looks like she can't believe what he's saying. In an irritated tone, she then calls him a complete amateur. Then she gets closer and places a hand on his shoulder. Suddenly, she grabs his face firmly, taking him by surprise. Annoyed, she asks who he thinks he is to diagnose her like that. Not understanding, he questions the diagnosis, saying he just pointed out a fact. She then yells at him not to be ridiculous, denying it's a stress reaction. He remains confused, asking what it was then, if not stress. After a pause, her expression changes completely as she stares at him. With great conviction, she finally reveals that what she feels for him is love. Holding his face, she identifies him as the legendary soldier, George Sai. Continuing, she says he is a master genius in hand-to-hand combat. The scene changes, showing him easily dodging a point-blank strike. He could even see a weapon's line of sight, allowing him to dodge bullets. Moving slowly, Sophia's advance was almost imperceptible to a soldier. It was a speed far slower than the punch of an experienced boxer. It was also incomparably slower than the shot from an M1911 pistol. At an almost complete standstill, the two finally faced each other up close. Then, without further hesitation, she finally kisses him there in the clearing. But this time, George simply didn't dodge the unexpected attack. From a nearby branch, the squirrel just watched the curious scene. Unlike before, he couldn't stop what was happening between them. Going back 30 days, the scene shows George's last mission. Waking up startled, a young man finds himself in a very unfamiliar place. Sitting up in bed, he realizes he's tied down by several strange restraints. He looks down at his body, trying to understand what's happening. Confused, he asks out loud where he is. Just then, a woman appears, looking surprised to see him awake. Stirring a pot, she comments that he has finally woken up. Turning to him, the woman asks how he's feeling. With a shocked expression, he recognizes her and asks if she's Sophia. But as he looks closer, he realizes something is very wrong. Then, another woman appears, warning him that he can't get up because he's lost blood. On a tray nearby, several surgical instruments are seen on the table. Holding a scalpel, she says that in any case, it would be impossible for him to stay awake. He just stares at her, completely confused by the strange situation. She then dips the tip of the scalpel into a small jar of liquid. With a quick motion, she flicks the substance at him. Feeling a jolt, he begins to thrash violently on the bed. The restraints on his wrists and ankles hold him down tightly. Despite struggling desperately, he can't break free from the leather straps. Letting out a small laugh, she warns him that it's useless to try to escape the trap. She explains that not even a bear could escape from that modified belt. Then, she compares him to a fish on a cutting board. With a smile, she tells him to act like a fish and get sliced. Gritting his teeth, he glares at her with a look of pure fury. Straining with all his might, he tries to break free from the restraints on his wrists. She tells him that not even a bear could escape that modified belt. Comparing him to a fish, she warns him that he's currently on the cutting board. Holding a scalpel, she orders him to act like a fish and stay still. Gritting his teeth, he glares at her with a look of pure rage. Screaming in frustration, he says the restraints won't budge at all. Walking toward him, she seems completely indifferent to his struggle. Lying on the bed, he asks if she is following someone's orders. Suddenly, he seems to have a terrible suspicion about who is behind this. An image of a sinister man flashes quickly through his mind. Questioning if these are Akechi's orders, he asks what they plan to do with him. Repeating the name Akechi, she falls silent for a brief moment. Believing he's right, he confirms to himself that he knew it all along. But she asks confusedly who that person is, leaving him surprised by her reaction. Picking up the instrument tray, she apologizes for the late introduction. Introducing herself, she says her name is Reen, and that she is a doctor. Lying there, he questions if she really is a doctor, looking highly suspicious. She explains that she is about to start surgery to remove a bullet. Continuing, she points out that there is a bullet lodged in his right thigh. She explains that the projectile could dissolve and cause severe poisoning. With a serious tone, she states that removing the projectile is mandatory. He just continues to lie there in silence, listening intently to her explanation. Then she warns him that she has some bad news and some very good news. Unfortunately, she says there is no anesthesia, so the surgery is going to hurt. She explains that's what the restraints are for, letting him thrash around as much as he needs to. Curious, he asks what the good news she mentioned is. Introducing herself as a doctor from Doctors Without Borders, she says she's used to this. Giving him a wink, she asks him to trust her without fear. Repeating the organization's name, He says he's heard of them before. Clapping her hands, she announces that the pre-surgical consent is now complete. Asking for verbal consent, she asks if he agrees to the proposed treatment, but with a serious look, he simply says he refuses to accept. Totally surprised, she can only ask what he just said. Warning him that it's no time for jokes, she says the operation needs to begin. He asks if she didn't hear him, repeating that he doesn't agree to anything. He then orders her to take off the restraints if she understood what was said. She screams, asking if he's crazy, warning him of the risk of death. Calmly, he responds that he already understands all the risks. Then, he offers to extract the bullet himself, since he learned how in the army. Calling it ridiculous, she yells that there is a doctor right in front of him, but he questions her skill, saying there is no concrete proof of it. Indignant that he doubts her, he asks if she has any way to prove it. Having no answer, she apologizes and falls into complete silence. He then asserts that he won't trust his life to a total stranger. Hearing this statement, she is left completely shocked and speechless. With a worried expression, she tries to justify herself but ends up hesitating. She explains that, as a doctor, she cannot operate on a patient in that condition. He just stares at her while she begins to mention medical standards. She concludes by saying that medical acts without consent are strictly prohibited. He then challenges her to follow the rules and take off his restraints. With teary eyes, she finally seems to give in to the patient's request. Approaching him, she begins to loosen the straps holding him to the bed. After releasing him, she goes to a corner and hangs up her lab coat. Standing at a distance, she just watches him in complete silence. Now sitting up, he sighs and asks her to lend him a scalpel. Without saying a word, she turns to grab the surgical instrument. She approaches and places the sharp blade directly into his hand. But in a swift motion, he grabs her hand, turning the weapon around. With tears in her eyes, she stares at him, totally shocked by the sudden action. Pressing the scalpel against her neck, he pins her completely to the bed. Shouting, he desperately asks what she thinks she's doing. Shifting to a flashback, she says she cannot act without consent. Breaking the rules, she screams, would disqualify her as a doctor. With the blade at her neck, she still tries to reason with him. Crying, she screams desperately that there is a patient right in front of her. Giving up now, according to her, would mean she'd cease to be a doctor. Remembering Sophia, he recalls her saying she wanted to save people. Hearing this memory, his expression changes completely with a powerful realization. He then says he will add a special clause to their consent. His proposal involved mutual trust between the two of them. He says he is also placing his life in her hands. Letting out a short laugh, he seems to find the whole situation amusing. Completely confused, she screams and asks what's so funny. He begins to explain that the most feared enemy on the battlefield is the one who is ready to throw his own life away. He says that a person who risks their life for a clear purpose becomes incredibly strong, while she watches him with tearful eyes. Suddenly, he makes a strange move and licks the sharp blade. Pointing the scalpel at her, he simply says he is surrendering. With a smile, he tells her he is going to trust the surgery entirely to her. Calling her doctor, he leaves her completely shocked by his decision. Closing her eyes for a moment, she finally seems to accept his choice. Winking, she says she accepts the responsibility and offers her support. But she reminds him that, as mentioned before, there is no anesthesia on the island. She warns him that the procedure will involve intense pain. Using scissors, she begins to cut the bandage to expose the wound. She tells him not to move because the main artery is close by. Nodding his head, he says he perfectly understands her warning. Totally focused, she prepares for the start of the delicate surgery. Raising her hands, she finally announces that she is starting the operation now. With precision, she makes the first cut on his leg with the scalpel. Maintaining her focus, she continues working carefully to extract the bullet. With her eyes fixed on the wound, she maintains maximum concentration. Completely motionless, he endures the pain without making a sound. Surprised by his endurance, she says he's truly incredible. She mentions that she has extracted many bullets in conflict zones. Recalling other cases, she knows that even for the strongest soldier, having a bullet removed is simply unbearable. No one could stay indifferent to such extreme pain, but he explains that pain can be suppressed with the right training. He says it's possible to endure almost any type of torture. Surprised, she wonders what kind of training would be necessary for that. While working on the wound, she keeps thinking about his incredible resistance. Fascinated, she can only wonder what kind of man he is. She then remembers that the most feared enemy on the battlefield is the one ready to throw his life away. Coming to a conclusion, she says that appearances can truly be deceiving. Thinking he was from the island, she asks if he's a veteran, but he questions if his past is relevant to the surgery right now. Feeling a bit awkward, she agrees he's right and apologizes. He continues to stare while she looks away. Embarrassed. Noticing something, he comments that everything feels very strange at that moment. He says that the more he looks, the more she looks like Sophia. After that, he stays silent for a moment, just observing her. He asks why someone from Doctors Without Borders ended up in a place like this. With a serious look, she stares at him without giving an immediate answer. Finally, she admits she is hunting a certain man around there. Hearing the answer, He asks who this man she's looking for could be. She then recalls a terrifying moment from her dark past. In that memory, a voice called out to her while she screamed in total desperation. In her mind, a bloody face asked her to remember. Then, a sinister man said that true art requires a great sacrifice. Returning to the present, she looks at him with a serious and determined expression. She picks up another surgical instrument to continue the procedure. Taking a sigh, she seems a little more relieved with the situation. With a smile, she announces that she found the bullet and will begin the extraction. Lying on the bed, he agrees to let her begin the medical procedure. With the instruments in hand, she finally starts the surgery on his leg. The scene changes, and time seems to have passed since the delicate operation. Outside the hut, he seems to be recovering well. Sitting on the ground with a crutch, he lets out a long sigh. Standing up, he comments that his strength seems fine, testing his leg. But suddenly he looks to the side and says something isn't right. She simply jumps from the porch, heading toward where he was. With a smile on her face, she warns him that he still needs to rest. Thanking her for the help, he promises he will pay for everything he owes. Telling him not to worry, she says everything is fine for now, but she says with a smile that he just needs to pay what he owes. Without understanding anything, he just asks what she meant by that. Extending her hand, she begins to list the fees for the surgery and hospitalization. With a huge grin, she reveals that the total comes to 548,000 yen. Completely frozen, he just screams and asks what she just said. Thanking her for the help, he promises to pay off his debt to her. With a smile, she tells him not to worry about it, but then she adds that it would be fine if he just paid what he owed. Extending her hand, she begins to list the costs of the surgery and the hospitalization. Then, she reveals that the total bill has reached 548,000 yen. Completely shocked, he shouts in disbelief at the absurd amount she's charging. The scene shifts, moving the story to a location filled with cherry blossoms. Arriving at a gate, he approaches two guards watching the entrance. Looking at the place, he tells himself that the whole view is incredible. Inside, a busy street shows people enjoying a local festival. Strolling through the area, several couples enjoy the romantic atmosphere of the district. From above, the street view reveals the beauty of the entire city. Surprised, he wonders how a place like this exists on an island made of trash. That place was known as a paradise of lust, the flower district. Approaching the gate, he stops in front of two guards in suits. One of the guards turns and asks what he wants there. Walking a bit further, he stops and stares at the two men without speaking. With a smile, one of them asks if he knows what kind of place this is. He responds calmly, saying he's just a customer looking for something. Directly, he announces that he came there to buy a woman. Cutting to a flashback, he questions the doctor on whether she charges for her work. After hearing her, he says he understands and admits he was mistaken. Not understanding, she asks what mistake he's referring to now. He explains that he assumed it was charity since she works for Doctors Without Borders. Concluding his thought, he says that for her, medicine is pure profit. Shocked, she starts shouting at him, trying to justify herself with anger. She yells that equipment and procedures are expensive, especially on this island. He then says he doesn't think it's bad that she charges, as she deserves to be compensated. Agreeing, she asks if he has the money to pay the bill. At that moment, he remembers a man begging for his money. In that memory, the man was screaming in desperation, his face covered in blood. With a serious expression, he prepares to answer her question. He says he'd love to pay, but unfortunately, he doesn't have any money at the moment. Bluntly, he concludes that payment is simply impossible right now. Totally shocked, she stares at him, unable to believe what she just heard. Placing her hand on her forehead, she says he's the first person to ever say that to her. She then starts to explain what happens if he can't pay. Sighing, she seems to decide on the best way to resolve the situation. She then proposes an infiltration mission to collect important information. Questioning the proposal, he asks what the goal of such a mission would be. Kneeling, she reveals that the man she is hunting is in that district. With a dark expression, she tells him to just kill the man. With a serious look, he simply says he understands the entire plan. Relieved, she says that helps, and explains that only certain women can enter. But as a man, he can enter as a customer without raising any suspicion. He just stays silent, processing all the information he just received. Questioning her, he asks if this was her plan from the start. Winking, she just says, maybe, and welcomes him. With a steady gaze, he stares at her without saying a single word. Back in the present, the guards ask if he came to buy a woman. The two of them stare at each other, seemingly unable to believe what they just heard. Then, they start laughing out loud, mocking his dirty appearance. Unfazed, he continues to to stare at the two men with a serious gaze. One of them comments that he looks like a slave miner and has a lot of nerve, but the other says that if he's a customer, the story changes. So, he asks to see a deposit to prove he's a client. With an air of superiority, he warns that the women here are high-end. Demanding a guarantee, the guard warns that he needs money just to get inside. Without it, they warn they'll consider him a looky-loo and send him away. Shouting intimidatingly, they call him dear customer once again. He just stares back at the two of them, remaining completely silent. Taking a long sigh, he prepares for what's to come. Turning to the guards, he admits he has no money on him, but with a determined look, he warns them he's getting through one way or another. Hearing this, the two guards become furious at his audacity. One of them then shouts, calling him a broke window shopper. His partner adds that this won't end well for him. Yelling at him, they both charge forward to attack at the same time. Immediately, he defends himself from the blows coming from all sides. To defend himself, he drops his crutch and blocks one of the strikes. Then, he uses the guards as a foothold to do a backflip. In mid-air, he spins and lands perfectly on one of the goons' shoulders. Quickly, he delivers a precise blow right to the neck of the guard below. Struck by the surprise attack, the man stumbles sideways, completely shocked. Then, he grabs him from behind and begins to twist his neck with force. His strength exploits the weakness of the vertebrae against sudden twisting motions. Aiming for a 50-degree angle, he applies all his strength to the twist. His gaze sharpens as he prepares the final blow on his opponent. With a swift motion, he completes the twist and snaps the man's neck. Applying an explosive force, he throws him far away with a single move. He then reveals the first rule of one-on-two combat. Seeing his fallen brother, the other guard runs screaming toward the body. He explains that the rule is to always kill one opponent instantly. Then, he says the second rule is that your opponent won't listen to you. Taunting the remaining guard, he points out that the weakling is already dead. The guard cries out in anger, his eyes bloodshot with pure hatred. Completely enraged, the man screams and calls him a bastard for everything. With that, he knows his enemy will definitely go on the attack. Overcome with rage, the guard lunges forward with completely uncontrolled and predictable swings. He then easily blocks the strike, taking advantage of his enemy's open guard. Dodging to the side, he prepares for a swift and precise counterattack. With a devastating blow, he smashes his fist into the guard's face with all his might. The impact sends the man flying backward, completely knocked out by the clean hit. Falling to the ground with a bloodied face, he lies completely still. Just then, a scream echoes through the street, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Seeing the bodies on the ground, a woman screams in desperation, yelling that it's a murder. The crowd gathers, confirming that what she said was true. He then remembers a warning he had received some time ago. In that flashback, the guards were asking if he was listening to them. Then he recalls that the doctor had also given him an important warning. She had told him not to cause any trouble in the flower district. The reason was that the place didn't welcome men who don't know how to play nice. According to her, it was a place only for gentlemen who know proper etiquette. Returning to the memory of the guards, they were saying that the gates only open. He then wonders if overpowering the guards would cause any trouble here, but one of the guards replies that he won't find out if he doesn't stay quiet. Yelling, the guard charges with his fist raised, ready to attack, but he simply tells the guard to shut up and stares him down. With his glasses broken, the man seems confused by the boy's reaction. He wonders what's wrong with this kid, who seems so small, but suddenly he sees him as a giant, intimidating figure. Saying he understands, he slams his crutch on the ground. He then announces that he'll back down for today, leaving the guards confused. With a smile, he says he'll do so because he is a gentleman. The two guards are left speechless, just watching the scene unfold. Turning his back, he starts to walk away slowly from the two guards. Before leaving, he casts one last look at the place he visited. Looking at the wall, he says he understands the layout of the place. He realizes the city is surrounded by walls with only one gate. He concludes it would be foolish to break in without knowing the internal structure. But suddenly he notices something and lets out a small grunt of surprise. Looking back, he spots a child quickly approaching with a cart. Stopping in front of him, the boy asks in surprise if he's Michio. Turning around, he recognizes the boy and asks if he's Kyo. Shouting his name, the boy runs toward him with a smile. With a leap, he joyfully jumps onto his friend's back. Hugging him, the boy asks where he's been all this time. The boy says he suddenly disappeared and that he'd been looking for him. Poking him, the boy asks him not to worry him like that again. Then the boy asks what he's doing in a place like this. With a hand on his chin, he replies that he was just buying a woman. Completely shocked, the boy stares at him with wide-eyed surprise. Then the boy starts to scream, unable to believe what he just heard. The boy keeps screaming, not understanding what's happening to his friend. He then yells that his friend wasn't the type of guy to say those things. With tears in his eyes, He says that Michio was always a kind person. Remembering the past, he says his friend was a good guy. Crying, the boy begs him not to say those strange things anymore. Thoughtfully, he says there might be another way to get inside. He then tells the boy that he has an idealized image of Michio. With his eyes full of tears, the boy just listens to what he says. Then, he warns that unfortunately, he can't become the ideal Michio. The boy stares at him, shocked by the statement he just heard. He says he's thinking about the next strategy and asks him not to interfere. With an angry expression, the boy just stays silent for a moment. Agreeing, the boy says he's right and that Michio is also a man. He continues, saying that men have desires they can't always control. Winking, he warns that if he finds him, he'll pretend not to know him. He stares at the boy, who seems to have misunderstood the situation completely. Covering his ears, the boy tells him to change the subject and get to work. Pushing the cart, the boy moves forward, still grumbling about his friend. Stopping the boy, he asks what's in the cart he's pulling. Pointing to the cart, the boy explains what he's carrying inside. He says it's sheets, laundry materials, and various cleaning supplies. With a smile, the boy says he takes care of the courtesan's personal needs. Hearing this, he gets an idea, and his expression changes completely. He comments that this is very convenient, leaving the boy confused by his response. With a smile, he says he can get in by hiding in Kyo's cart. Shocked by the plan, the boy screams in desperation, unable to believe the idea. Looking at the tarp, he says it looks like there's room for one person. Trying to stop him, the boy yells that this is obviously not okay. Not understanding, he asks why not, making the boy even more angry. The boy yells that he won't help him with that and refuses to get involved. He explains that you can't get in through the front without a cash deposit. Chuckling, the boy says he wouldn't do anything in there. Relieved, the boy says he forgot about that and asks how much is needed. In a serious tone, he states that at least 500,000 is needed. With his arms wide open, the boy says he's never seen that much money in his life. At that moment, he starts to devise a plan to use Kyo to his advantage. With a smile, he says he thought of something good regarding Masa's inheritance. Shocked, the boy asks if he's talking about that same Masa. Revealing the news, he says that Masa died, and the boy is shocked. With a malicious smile, he says Masa gave him all the money. The boy stares at him, trying to understand what he was planning to do. He asks if the plan is to use Masa's inheritance as the deposit. With a smile, he says there's no other choice to enter the district. Speechless, the boy just stares at him, completely shocked by his coldness. He then adds that there's no way to find Masa's sister. He says it would be more meaningful to use the money that way. Angry, the boy stomps his foot on the ground with great force and rage. Grabbing him, the boy screams desperately for him to stop with that idea. Crying, he begs him not to use Masa's inheritance for this. He then says that straying from the human path is absolutely wrong. In silence, he looks at a cherry tree, thinking about the whole situation. With a smile, he agrees that Kyo is absolutely right, leaving the boy surprised. So, he proposes a new deal for them to reach an agreement. He promises not to touch the inheritance if Kyo helps him. Asking if it isn't a good deal, he waits for the boy's answer. With clenched teeth, the boy seems to ponder the offer. He just stares at the boy, waiting patiently for his final decision. Suddenly, the boy smiles and says, the idea is actually very good. Showing the cart, he says that he can completely relax inside. Sighing, he apologizes to Kyo, saying it's for the mission. That district was a place of luxury that flourished in the middle of the slums. He believes that the key to escaping the island is in there. His soldier's sixth sense warned him that something important awaited. Pushing the cart, the boy seemed very nervous about the whole situation. Arriving at the entrance, he comes face to face with the two guards at the gate again. From inside, he whispers for the boy not to get nervous and to act normally. But the boy asks who he's talking to and tells him to leave it to him. Seeing the boy, the guard seems surprised as he approaches. Waving his hand, the boy shouts a friendly greeting to the guards. Hidden, he remains silent, just observing the boy's interaction. One of the guards recognizes him, calling him Kyo, the errand boy. In a hurry, the boy asks them to let him pass quickly, but the two guards move to block his path completely. Surprised by their attitude, the boy just stares at them, not understanding what's happening. One of them then informs him that the decision of whether he passes or not is up to them. Trying to get by, the boy says they already know his face and asks to be let through. But the guards ignore his request and decide to search the cart thoroughly. Outraged, he shouts, asking why, since they've never searched him before. At that, one of the guards violently grabs him by the collar. Telling him to shut up, the man asks if he has something to hide. Losing his patience, the guard throws him hard to the ground without hesitation. After knocking him down, the man approaches and starts to lift the tarp. Pulling the fabric, he prepares to inspect the cart's contents. Hidden inside, the young man just stares at the guard, waiting to be discovered. Lying on the ground, Kyo realizes he made a mistake because of his nerves. Seeing the suspicious guard, he runs over and tries to stop him from searching the cart. For Michio, this moment was a crucial test for his plan. With a quick motion, the guard rips the tarp off the cart all at once. To his surprise, he sees nothing inside but supplies. This was exactly what Michio expected, and he had already prepared for it. Rummaging through the load, the guard inspects everything carefully, irritating the boy. Picking up a handsaw, he asks what it's doing in the middle of the gear. The boy explains that they are work tools for his various daily tasks. The guard then runs the saw along his face, testing the blade's edge. Using the tools, Michio had built a secret hiding spot in the cart. With a false bottom, he was able to stay completely hidden underneath. Lying in the compartment, he just waits for the guard to finish the inspection. The scene shifts to a flashback showing what happened an hour earlier. At that time, the boy was complaining to him not to break his work tools. He notices the cart is falling apart and offers to fix it. Excited, the boy thanks him and accepts his friend's help immediately. Back in the present, the guard says there's nothing suspicious. The other guard agrees and looks at the sky, seemingly lost in thought. Finally, they open the gate and shout to the boy that he can pass through. The boy puts the tarp back in place, covering his friend once again. Then, he passes through the gate, pushing the cart into the district. Once inside, he says the whole thing was incredibly stressful for him. Irritated, the boy says he tried his best not to raise any suspicions. With a smile, he thanks Kyo, saying they made it in. Embarrassed, the boy stares at him, surprised by the sudden gratitude. Asking what that was about, the boy says he didn't do anything special. Announcing that he has to go, the boy prepares to run off. Before leaving, he yells for Michio to remember the promise they made. With his eyes closed, he simply agrees and says he got the message. He asks the name of the courtesan the boy works for. Winking, the boy says she is one of the 4 supremes. Hearing the name, he stays silent for a moment, appearing to think. The boy tells him to go home and says goodbye, heading off. Alone, he celebrates having successfully entered the flower district. Recalling the mission, he remembers he needs to find a certain man. He recalls that the name of the man he's looking for is Kenzaki. Realizing he has very little information, he needs to come up with a new plan. Using his crutch, he decides to walk through the district to investigate. On the streets, many wealthy men strolled with beautiful women by their side. Walking through the city, he always performed a careful survey of the area. He knew the streets held more history and culture than logic. To him, it was essential to feel the city's atmosphere with all his senses. Observing the buildings, he notices a certain regularity in the construction. He notices that in one tenement, there are 5 rooms with similar designs. At the entrance, a woman sat as a sign of welcome to customers. On the other hand, he notices that some rooms were currently closed. Observing the movement, he realizes many of the rooms were shut. He comments that the place was quite busy, even during the day. Walking through the courtyard, he sees that the open rooms were few and far between. Looking at one of the rooms, he sees the woman on the left is available. In the room on the right, another woman also seemed to be waiting for a customer. Making his choice, he turns to pick one of the rooms. Taking the first step, he decides which woman to approach first. Without hesitation, he walks directly toward the room on the left. Asking for permission, he says he has something to ask the woman. She then looks up with a serious and curious expression. Standing in front of her, he waits for a response to his approach. With a small smile, she seems amused by the unusual situation. She then informs him that they do not accept first-time customers. Confused, he asks about the policy of not accepting first-timers. An older woman then appears and says that persistent men are not welcome there. Turning his back, he seems to give up, but stays standing in the same spot. Repeating the phrase, he doesn't seem to understand exactly what it means. Several women begin repeating that they don't accept first-time customers. One of them approaches and apologizes, reinforcing the establishment's rule. Another woman repeats the same phrase with a slightly nervous smile. From behind, a female voice once again denies him service. Another woman, in the dark, also says that first-time customers are complicated. Not understanding the rule, he stands there trying to process the strange situation. Irritated, he shouts and asks what the hell first-time customers are, but suddenly, a loud scream coming from nearby catches his attention. Someone in the crowd shouts for a man to let go of Lady Kasuzu. Witnessing the scene, he hears a plea for help coming from nearby. A man was holding a woman hostage, threatening to kill her if anyone approached. People in the crowd scream for him to stop, saying that violence is forbidden. Mocking them, the man says they think far too highly of themselves. He claims he gave everything to Kosuzu, but she didn't want him. With a knife to her throat, he screams that this is just a flower district. One of the men replies that it's his own fault for not being a regular customer. The man yells back, saying the whole city is in on the scam. In a fit of rage, he curses the place, calling it a filthy slum. Watching the chaos, He simply observes the scene unfold in silence. The man says at this rate, he'll end up as a slave miner. Hearing the mention of a slave miner, his expression changes completely. He remembers that exploited men in the district were sent to that place. Desperate, the man asks her if she wants to die right there with him. Not knowing what to do, the crowd panics. Angrily, one of the men says he won't let the insult slide. A woman comes through the crowd, telling everyone to get out of her way. The men recognize her and shout Lady Yoizi's name in surprise. He then remembers that she is Kyo's employer in the district. Threateningly, the man screams for her not to come closer, or he'll kill the hostage. He keeps yelling, asking if she hears his threats. Stopping in front of him, she stares at him in silence for a moment. Suddenly, she hits him with a fan, leaving him completely stunned. With contempt, she calls him a loser for failing to even be a customer. The crowd comments that it's a common story of men threatening courtesans. He just watches, knowing it's a typical tale in that world. She says a man who only threatens without the courage to act has no right to wound their pride, and tells him to act like it. With a firm gaze, she orders him to leave the city quietly. Terrified, the man screams and calls for the men in suits to help him. She orders her men to grab him, but they hesitate to act. Frightened, they say the man is armed with a sharp blade. Surprised, she asks if they are serious, unable to believe their cowardice. Enraged, the man screams not to mock him and tightens his grip on the knife. He lunges to attack, screaming that she's going to die right there. With the knife pointed at her, he draws closer and closer for the strike, but in the blink of an eye, someone steps in front to protect her. In a swift motion, he throws himself forward and intercepts the man's attack. Grabbing the fan, he uses it to shield himself from the knife strike. Pulling her back, he saves her from the impending attack of the enraged man. Surprised, she just stares at him, shocked by his sudden intervention. Grabbing the man's arm, he stops the attack with his strength. With a grip of steel, he holds the attacker's wrist firmly. Overpowering the man, he disarms him and glares at him with a serious look. Slamming the man to the ground, he pins him down, making him scream in pain. Surprised by his actions, she just watches, not knowing how to react. The guards and the people in the crowd are shocked by the sudden turn of events. Holding the knife, he says he secured it and asks if they have handcuffs. The guards then approach and lead the attacker away as he screams to be let go. Kneeling, the young woman apologizes for putting her sister in danger. Consoling her, the lady says she couldn't stand being insulted like that by him. She warns that this place creates desperate people, and they must be careful. With a smile, the young girl agrees and says she will be more careful. Turning to him, the lady seems to want to talk about what happened. Thanking him for the help, she asks if he knows some kind of martial arts. He replies it's something like that, while she praises his excellent movements. Observing his clothes, she asks if he is an errand boy. With his eyes closed, he replies that he is not an errand boy. With a serious look, he states he is just a customer looking for fun. Surprised, she comments that he is a customer then. Turning around, she calls out and asks him to follow her closely. Not understanding, he just stares at her, confused by the sudden invitation. With a smile, she says she's inviting him to her gaming room. He just stares at her with a serious gaze, showing no reaction at all. Sweeping the street, the boy lets out a sigh, looking quite bored. He complains that Michio is trying to have fun without having any money. Angrily, he shouts that it's far too early for him to be doing that. But then he says that without cash, Michio wouldn't be entertained anyway. With a smile, he says he's going to make a good meal for him. Just then, Lady Yoisi calls for him and warns that there's a customer waiting. The boy responds with a smile, addressing her as Lady Yoise. Upon seeing the two together, he is completely blindsided by the scene. Not understanding what's happening, the boy screams, shocked to see Michio with his boss. Once inside the room, the two sit down to talk privately. Peeking through the door, the boy tells them to enjoy their time together. Seated, they remain in silence, just staring at each other for a moment. Confused, the boy wonders why Michio is with Lady Yoise. With her hands reached out, she beckons him to come closer and sit near her. Sipping his tea, he just stares at her, showing no reaction. Telling him to do whatever he wants, she lifts her kimono and teases him. Peeking from outside, the boy reacts with surprise to the scene. After running off, the boy says it's time to clean. Inside the room, Michio takes his teacup and observes her calmly. He then asks if this is her way of thanking him for his help. But she says he saved her life, and this would be far too cheap. At that, he stands up with his crutch and moves toward her. Getting closer, he sits right in front of the mysterious woman. Without hesitation, he places his hand firmly on her thigh. She stares at him intently, her expression unchanging despite his bold move. Then he begins to move his hand, slowly sliding it up her leg, but suddenly he stops and pulls away, apologizing for something. Revealing his plan, he says he lied about being a simple customer. He then asks her to answer some questions as a form of thanks. Exhaling, she gives a small smile at the unexpected turn of events. With a laugh, she enjoys the twist in the situation. With a serious look, she says she already knew he wasn't a customer. Closing her fan, she says he passed the test she prepared. Not understanding, he asks what test she's talking about now. Curious, He asks how she knew he wasn't a client. With a smile, she responds that the answer is very simple. Opening her fan, she explains that the secret was in his bracelet. She says that official customers receive a bracelet as proof of payment. Without it, people are considered suspicious and dangerous infiltrators. She then reveals that the phrase about not accepting customers is a polite rejection. After hearing this, he says he finally understands how things work there. She then explains that it costs a lot of money to have fun in that city. When a customer enters, they put money into an automated machine. Just to talk to them, the machine sucks up a bill every 5 minutes. She says customers have to overcome the terror of watching their money vanish. With a laugh, she admits the system is an outrageous scam. He just stares at her in silence, processing all the new information. With a serious look, he says that's how customers like that are created. Using her fan, she agrees with the conclusion he reached. She explains that all customers start as regulars and cannot touch them. After meeting certain criteria, they rise to the level of preferred. Kneeling, she explains that only at this level can they have more intimacy. She finishes by saying that only the preferred are allowed to go to bed. Surprised by the system, he just stares at her with a curious gaze, commenting he finds it surprising that people would pay for a scam. Closing her fan, she seems to reflect on the district's situation. With a serious look, she says that isn't the only reason. He continues in silence, waiting for her to explain what she meant. He then asks what kind of people these wealthy customers are. With the fan held to her face, she reveals that most are from the mainland. With a surprised look, he seems to have an important revelation. He asks if there is transportation off the island, like ships or planes. With the fan still to her face, she apologizes and seems to hesitate to answer. She then explains that information regarding leaving the island is confidential. Irritated by the answer, he just clicks his tongue, unable to do anything about it. She then asks if he's finished with all his questions. Closing his eyes, he says he has just one last question. He asks if she knows a man named Kenzaki, a former doctor. She asks who Kenzaki is, appearing not to recognize the name. She explains that it's difficult to find someone by name alone in that place. After hearing this, he says he understands the situation and falls silent. With a smile, she says it's now her turn to ask. Holding his hand, she makes an unexpected proposal. With a seductive look, she asks if he wouldn't like to become hers. Confused, he stares at her, not understanding what she just proposed. The following scene shows the end of another chapter in the story. In a makeshift ring, a fight was about to begin between two men. With her fan, the woman announces the start of the fight with a shout. He then finds himself fighting a man in a black suit. The reason for that fight was a mystery that would soon be revealed. Back in the room, he asks what she meant by her proposal. Correcting herself, she tells him to become one of them, not just hers. Not understanding the correction, he just stares at her with a confused expression. She then reveals that she is recruiting him to be one of her bodyguards. Shocked by the proposal, he is left speechless, just staring at her. Asking him to follow, she gets up and walks across the room. Going up the stairs, he follows her to the upper floor of the house. Reaching a door, she opens it to reveal what was inside. With wide eyes, he is surprised by what he sees. The room was an elegant, hybrid space, very different from a slum. She explains that the courtesans form groups of 5 to protect themselves. They live together in residences on the upper floors of the gambling houses. Clapping her hands, she gets everyone's attention for an introduction. Hearing the call, all the women of the Camellia group gather around. Introducing herself, Kosuzu thanks him for the help he gave earlier on the street. The other two, Pon and Ron, also introduce themselves while going about their business. She then explains that each group can hire an exclusive bodyguard. Suddenly, a man enters and shouts for Lady Yoisi, looking worried. Shocked, he asks why he's being fired from his position. With an apology, she says that he will be the new bodyguard. He then says that he hasn't agreed to take the job yet. Kneeling, the man begs her to reconsider firing him. Looking at the others, she asks if anyone has any complaints about the change. With smiles, the two agree with their leader's decision. The other two also say that it's fine either way. Desperate, the man begs for one more chance to prove his worth. Pointing at him, the man shouts that he won't lose to some scrawny guy. With the fan over her face, she seems amused by the situation. One of the women says he's a poor guy and should be given a chance. The man shouts that he'll crush him and won't go easy, even if he's injured. With a smile, she points at him and says, "The fight is on." And so, the fight for the position of exclusive bodyguard finally began. The man lunges forward with a strike, but he easily dodges the blow. Using his crutch, he moves backward, avoiding his opponent's attack. Annoyed, the man tells him not to get cocky just for dodging. He just stares at his opponent in silence, waiting for the next move. With a shout, the man rushes forward again with a series of punches. He dodges every single blow with a series of fluid movements. As a former soldier, he disliked unnecessary violence in any situation. Screaming in anger, the man launches into another desperate attack. The man advances with a flurry of strikes, trying to hit him with everything he's got. This also also applied to fights, where he always maintained his composure. He thinks that becoming a bodyguard would help him stay in the city. The benefits of that job were too great for him to ignore. Gripping his crutch, he seems to make a final decision about the fight. With a swift movement, he throws his crutch aside and moves forward. Seeing the opening, the man yells that this will be his final blow, but he prepares for a quick and decisive counterattack. With a precise strike, he hits the man's chin hard. The impact of the blow sends the bodyguard flying, knocking him out instantly. All the women in the room are shocked by his overwhelming victory. Raising his arm, she declares him the winner of the fight and the new bodyguard. Outside, the others comment on how incredibly strong he was in the fight, and so he takes the first step on his new journey in that district. Now in his new suit, he complains that it's hard to move like this. Just then, one of the women approaches him from behind, catching him by surprise. With a little laugh, she says his tie is a bit crooked. As she fixes the knot, she starts to comment on the fight from earlier. She then finishes by saying his match was really cool to watch. Moving away from him, she comments that there aren't many clients that day. Turning around with a smile, she invites him to a welcome party. Straightening his tie, he just stares at her with a very serious expression. Raising their glasses, everyone toasts together at the welcome party. Gathered in the room, they all seem to be enjoying the celebration. She asks if he doesn't drink, and he replies that alcohol is poison. One of the women asks why Kumika is looking so grumpy at the party. With puffed out cheeks, she complains that the party was supposed to be for just the two of them. The other woman says that a romance with a guard is absolutely forbidden there. Embarrassed, Kumika denies it, saying it's nothing like what she's thinking. She then admits she feels strange whenever a strong man is around. At that, Ron slams her cup on the table with a very serious expression. Eating a chicken leg, she seems quite interested in the conversation. Looking at Kumika, she warns that if she has a romance, she'll snitch on her. Eating sushi, he comments that they earn points for that, which is good. Annoyed, Kosuzu tells her not to say such terrible things since they are comrades. One of the women asks how many points a romance violation is worth. Consulting a scroll, Ron begins to look for the information she requested. Surprised, she shouts that the penalty is 20 points, a very high amount. Irritated, Kumika screams that she is not having a romance with him. Ron says that with 20 points, she could level up in the district. Sitting at the table, he explains that their rank is determined by points. He continues, saying the three of them are lower-ranking courtesans called Usubeni. In contrast, Yoisei and Kumika are higher-ranking, the Obarazukio. Kosuzu explains that Yoisei is close to becoming one of the four supremes. Kumika asks her to stop, saying she doesn't even want to hear about it. He then comments that the city is full of ranks for everyone. With a sip, she confirms that the district is a hierarchical society. He just stares at her in silence, absorbing the new information. He asks if reporting others is a way to rank up, and she confirms it. Filling her glass, she says some try to gain points by snitching on others. Getting up from the table, he approaches Ron with his crutch. Standing behind her, he stares at her while she reads the scroll. With wide eyes, he prepares to grab the scroll from her. In a swift move, he snatches the paper from her hands by surprise. Annoyed, she screams, asking what he's doing since he's a guard. Reading the scroll, he finds a rule worth 10 points. He then asks if the rule says no one can leave the district. She confirms it and says that neither courtesans nor guards are allowed to leave. With a dark look, she reveals that the only way out is death. The other two comment that, at least, they never have to worry about food. They say the place is paradise because of the perks. Surrounded by food, they seem to be enjoying life in the district. He then says the place looks like paradise, but with a catch. With a serious look, he questions if it isn't actually a prison. Shouting, Ron asks if there's an errand boy nearby. With a smile, Kyo appears and answers, yes, attending to her call. Everyone starts ordering another round of drinks at the party. Interrupting, he mentions that the errand boy entered through the gate today. She then confirms that errand boys are the only exception. She invites him to sit and eat, since it's his welcome party. Shocked, the boy notices that Michio is speaking to them as an equal. Looking at the moon, the boy sighs, looking quite pensive. He tells himself that Michio has become someone from a distant world. With his stomach growling, he realizes he is very hungry. He says he wants to eat Lady Yoisi's leftovers, but an old woman appears and screams that he can't do that. Smoking, she explains that leftovers are sold to the slums later. Irritated, the boy tells her to shut up, but she reprimands him. Suddenly, the door opens and Michio appears, asking for Kyo. Running toward him, the boy asks why he's there. He then shows the food he brought, a feast full of delicacies. Drooling over the food, the boy says Michio really understands him well, but the old woman screams, warning that he can't touch those leftovers at all. Pointing at Michio, she says that man might end up reporting him for it. Scared, the boy looks at Michio, who just stares at the situation in silence. He then says he has no interest in snitching or earning points. Showing the food, he mentions he has a favor to ask as an advance. With a serious look, the boy stares at him, seemingly thinking about the proposal. The next day, the boy walks through the forest pushing his cart. With a tired expression, He seems exhausted from all the walking. Suddenly, he sees something in the distance and lets out a cry of surprise. Waving his hand, he calls out to someone hanging laundry. Turning around, the woman stares at him, confused by the boy's sudden call. Running toward her, he asks if she is Lady Rinne. With a giggle, she says that thanks to him, Michio managed to get in. Handing him a cup, she offers a drink to the boy, who is surprised. Amazed by the clean water, he says he's never seen anything like it. Sitting down, she says he needs to drink clean water and offers to teach him. She explains that you just have to boil and extract the water, leaving him impressed. With a smile, she asks if Michio is doing well. Excitedly, he tells her that Michio became an exclusive guard on his first day. With a satisfied smile, she says she's happy to hear that. Remembering something, he says Michio asked him to deliver a message. Handing her an envelope, the boy says Michio asked to give it to her. Opening the package, she reads the message with a worried expression. In the note, Michio asked for information about a man named Kenzaki. Curious, the boy tries to peek and asks if she is looking for him. With a smile, he offers to pass information to Michio. Closing her eyes, she seems to weigh the boy's offer. With a serious look, she says she can't trust him, which surprises him. Irritated, he screams, asking why she can't trust him with this. She explains that the district is closed off, and if they are found out, it will be dangerous. With her hand on the envelope, she tells him not to worry about it. She shouts that, in the worst-case scenario, he could be killed for this. Terrified by the warning, the boy falls silent, just staring at her. The scene shifts to a flashback of their previous meeting. That night, Michio had asked the boy to deliver the letter to the doctor. With a smile, the boy says it would be a very easy task. He tells them to eat the food he received, but the old woman screams, warning him not to eat those leftovers. Crouching down, he offers the food to both of them, asking for silence. He says it's hush money, so they stay quiet about everything. Inside the box was a full feast with various delicious foods. With wide eyes, the old woman is shocked by the offer. Gritting her teeth, she seems to struggle against the temptation to accept. But in the end, she gives in and starts devouring the feast, thanking him. The two eat desperately, grateful for the food they gained. With his mouth full, the boy smiles, happy to eat so much. Back at the clinic, the boy looks pensive after finishing his meal. Clutching the bag, he seems to have made an important decision. Telling everything to the doctor, he says Michio lied to him. She just stares at him, curious to hear the rest of the story. Angrily, he tells her that Michio said he was going to buy a woman. Irritated, he says he almost started to hate him because of the lie. But he says he's glad Michio is there to help people. With a determined look, he shouts that he wants to be of help to Michio. She just stares at him in silence, surprised by the boy's excitement. Whispering, he says Michio can't do anything without his help. With a sigh, she seems to agree with what the boy said. Laughing, they comment on how Michio has been acting strange lately. With a smile, he tells her to tell him everything without worrying. Closing her eyes, she finally agrees to trust the boy. With a serious expression, she begins to talk about the man named Kenzaki. She explains that he is likely using a different name and face. Desperate, the boy screams that they won't be able to find him then. Sitting down, she says Kenzaki has a unique and special characteristic. With a serious expression, she says it's something he cannot change. The boy stares at her, paying close attention to every word she says. Meanwhile, back in the flower district, life went on as usual. He notices that customers are coming from outside the island to visit the district. Yoisei comments that the place is surprisingly peaceful at the moment. This makes him think there must be some way to enter and leave the island, but he replies that it isn't possible, as this is a mission for him. Laughing at his seriousness, she calls him a very stiff guy. She mentions that he's starting work a bit late that day. Looking up at the balconies, he sees the others have already begun their day. She explains that those working in the morning are the ones with the fewest points. Suddenly, Kosuzu screams and calls out for a man named Fujinaga. Waving at him, she asks if he's free today. Feeling awkward, he replies, maybe next time, and brushes her off. Shocked by the rejection, she just watches him walk away without a word. He comments that she looks desperate and that they must have quotas to fill. With a smile, Yoshi says that one day he'll understand how it all works. Approaching him, she asks if Kyo enjoyed the leftovers he got. He asks what she's talking about, and she says she already knew. With a sly look, she asks what kind of plan he's hatching. Without saying a word, he just stares at her with a very serious expression. He then tells her not to make accusations without any concrete basis. Turning away, she says she won't report him, but tells him to remember this. Pointing at him, she warns that he now owes her a favor. Unfazed, he asks what her true goal is. She replies that when the time comes, he just needs to be on her side. He simply observes her in silence, processing the proposal he just received. Suddenly, a voice calls out to her, interrupting their conversation. A man in a hat approaches and greets her with a smile. He asks how she is, and if she's taking good care of her health. Taking off his hat, he asks if there have been any changes in her body. Calling him Dr. Muroi, she responds that everything is fine with her. With a smile, the doctor says that all the women are his patients. He explains that he needs to check if their bodies and minds are healthy. Seeing Michio, he says he doesn't recognize that face. She introduces him as Michio, the new exclusive guard for the Camellia group. Introducing the doctor, she says he performs the regular checkups for the courtesans. But she finds it strange, asking if the health exam wasn't supposed to be later. The doctor explains he's there because of the district president's condition. Worried, she asks if the president is okay, and he confirms it. Suddenly, the doctor seems to notice something and turns to Michio. Looking at the crutch, he asks if he fractured something. He replies it was just a somewhat deep cut, nothing major. With his hand on his chin, the doctor says it's serious and could get infected. Offering help, he asks to take a look, but Michio refuses. Warning him not to take injuries lightly, the doctor insists on helping. Crouching down, he tries to disinfect the wound but is stopped again. With a serious look, Michio prepares for a swift and decisive action. Suddenly, he lands a blow on the doctor, sending him flying. With a circular motion, the doctor throws his gloves into the air. Surprised by the attack, everyone on the street is shocked by the scene. Not understanding anything, the boy asks what all of that meant. She then reveals that the man they are looking for has a prosthetic arm. With wide eyes, the boy is shocked by the revelation. She explains that the man has no arm from the elbow down. She continues, saying that no matter how much he changes his appearance, a lost arm will never grow back. The boy just stares at her in silence, processing the information. Back at the scene, the doctor's young assistant lunges for an attack. With his eyes fixed, Michio prepares to face the new opponent. He dives to the side, dodging the youth's attack. With focused eyes, he notices something important during the confrontation. The young assistant attacks at high speed. He just watches the strike coming his way without moving from the spot. Using his crutch, he blocks the blade's attack with a precise movement. Surprised by the scene, Yoice just watches the fight unfold in front of her. With great strength, he holds the crutch and maintains the block against the attack. Shocked by the block, the assistant stares at him, unable to believe what happened. Shouting, the doctor orders his assistant to stop the attack immediately. He then disarms him, breaking up the confrontation between the two men. Backing away, the doctor looks relieved to have avoided a tragedy. With a serious expression, he simply watches the scene unfold. Apologizing, the doctor says his assistant isn't well trained. He also apologizes for trying to treat him so abruptly before. In a worried tone, he mentions that deep wounds can get infected. Adjusting his prosthesis, he says he knows what it's like to miss a limb. Snapping his fingers, he comments that living like that is quite inconvenient. He just stares at the doctor in silence, showing no reaction. Reprimanding the assistant, the doctor says he hasn't forgiven his careless actions. He then tells the boy that he isn't the one who should receive the apology. The young assistant just stares back, agreeing with the scolding. Bowing, he sincerely apologizes for his reckless behavior. With a dark look, the man says to himself that he almost killed him. Still serious, he glares at the assistant, taking in the situation. The doctor then apologizes to Yoisei for his assistant's behavior. Calling for Roku, he says it's time to leave, and the boy obeys. Concerned, she asks if he's okay after all that chaos. Holding his crutch, he confirms he's fine. He then notices that his crutch was broken during the fight. With a grim look, he analyzes the damaged wood in his hands. That night, he sits on the roof, watching the full moon. With his eyes closed, he dives into his memories, concentrating deeply. In his mind, he sees himself walking toward the young assistant. The two stare each other down, like they're in a duel. The tension is palpable, as if a fight is inevitable. With a leap, he lunges at the youth who just watches him. He launches a powerful direct strike, but suddenly, the young man reveals glasses and a completely different expression. In his mind, he sees himself blocking a hit, but the opponent counters. Because of his injured leg, he trips and falls. Seeing the opening, the youth lunges with his blade for a direct strike. The opponent lands a spinning blow, throwing him aside. He manages to dodge, but the attack breaks his crutch in the process. With a sweaty face, he screams in pain from the impact. Surprised, he sees the opponent jumping for an overhead attack, but the boy says his movement was far too slow to work. Breaking into a cold sweat, he realizes he's at a massive disadvantage. The assistant delivers a final blow, hitting him dead center. With a cry, he sees himself completely overwhelmed by the opponent's attack. Sitting on the roof, he notes that he lost again. 57 defeats now. He continues to simulate every possible attack and defense in his mind. With his injured leg, he estimates his skill is at only 40% of its normal capacity. Even so, he keeps running the simulations, predicting every move the enemy might make. He continues the mental combat, taking several hits in his head. This constant repetition, was a crucial part of his soldier training. In real situations, he could predict and react to enemy attacks. This ability drastically increased his battle IQ in the field. He remembers how strong the assistant seemed in the simulation. Having a win rate of less than 10% was a first for him. At only 12 years old, he wondered how that was possible. He questioned if that incredible speed was actually reachable. Suddenly, a voice calls out, snapping him out of his deep thoughts. Looking back, he sees Kyo approaching and asks what's up. With a smile, Kyo says he finally understood about the prosthetic arm. He reveals that he has already managed to identify Kenzaki. It looks like he'll have the chance to fight him soon. Not understanding any of it, the boy asks what's going on with him. With a smile, he tells Kyo that he identified the target thanks to him. The boy looks very happy with the compliment. Patting his back, the boy says praising him won't get him anywhere. Walking down the hall, he asks Kyo to keep their conversation a secret. Stopping suddenly, he seems to catch a strange scent in the air. With a confused expression, he looks ahead, trying to figure out what it is. Entering the room, he finds the two women looking quite ill. Kosuzu was crying, while Kumika tried to comfort her in her arms. He just stares at them in silence, unsure of what to do. Entering a room, the man and the boy come across a scene. The boy grabs his leg, shouting to get his attention. He asks what's wrong, and the boy yells at him not to say it like that. Pointing at two young women, he warns that Miss Kosuzu is crying. His only response is to ask, "So what?" making the boy question him. Shouting at him, the boy says one should pretend not to notice the crying. He insists the man remember this important rule. From afar, the man simply observes the two women talking on the sofa. Meanwhile, the girl mentions something about the monthly evaluation meeting. Crying, the other asks what she meant by that. She then says that this cannot be found out under any circumstances. Her friend tells her to stay calm, guaranteeing that no one will notice a thing. Making a silence gesture, she claims that only the two of them know about it. Then she asks if that's right, looking directly at the other girl. With tears in her eyes, the girl remains silent, unable to answer. Under the moon, a message confirms that the payment has finally been completed. Pressing the subject to the ground, he says thanks, noting that it was useful. He watches the customer walk away with the girl, thanking him profusely. The customer promises to return, and the girl confirms she will wait. Letting out a sigh, the girl closes her eyes for a brief moment. Suddenly, a colleague comes up from behind and compliments her, catching her attention. Yoisei comments that was the fourth room of the day, securing the monthly evaluation. Clenching her fists, she promises to do her best as Yoisei's colleague. Her friend then asks her not to overwork herself. Across the street, his men call him to finally leave. Alone, he begins to understand the connection to this monthly evaluation. Over time, the flower district slowly began to transform. The streets became much busier, with many people moving through the area. Moving to the next day, two birds perch on a branch. On the roof, the man sits cross-legged in a meditation pose. Suddenly, he opens his eyes and focuses intensely on something ahead. Resting his hand on his knee, he begins the movement to stand up. With an extremely fast motion, he executes a strike. He then lands on the roof, spinning with a second powerful blow. Startled by the noise, the birds on the branch take flight. Standing now, he observes the inner workings of his mechanical leg. After testing the movement, a slight smile appears on his face. In the next scene, a gong is struck hard by a mallet. Holding the mallet, a man prepares to make a major announcement. He shouts that the monthly evaluation meeting is finally about to begin. In front of the stage, a crowd of women watches in silence. A scoreboard shows the rules and the punishment for last place. In the audience, all participants watch the board with serious expressions. As the symbol of the local hierarchy, the meeting defined their future. To conclude, he announces the long-awaited arrival of the great president. Stepping forward, the president takes her first step onto the path ahead. Without ceremony, she steps on the back of a man serving as a stepping stool. Continuing her journey, she climbs a staircase made of people. At the top of the human pyramid, she heads toward her podium. From a distance, the man watches the entire scene with a serious expression. Suddenly, she ends up tripping in the middle of her path. Losing her balance completely, she falls forward unexpectedly. A hand catches hers and stops the fall. Immediately, two guards support her and ask if she's hurt. With a smile, she responds that they are very reliable. Then, one of the guards lunges at the man who made her trip. Without hesitation, he lands a direct blow to the subordinate's face. Lying on the ground, the man writhes after receiving the violent hit. Standing still, he and his companions watch the result of the assault. After everything, she finally climbs the podium, escorted by guards. On stage, a guard kneels and holds a megaphone for her. Using the megaphone, she addresses the massive crowd of women. She goes on to say that customers come for their effort and dignity. Grateful, The women in the audience begin to clap for her. With a smile, she claims that just being alive is a victory. Changing her tone, she confesses she wouldn't want to hold these meetings, but she explains that competition maintains the district's quality. She says they cannot function well without proper competition. With a dark smile, she asks who will end up in last place. Her words create a tense silence throughout the entire audience. Striking the gong, the man shouts for everyone to line up immediately. In response, a group of men runs to form the requested line. They all position themselves in silence, awaiting the next orders. The protagonist observes the movement with an attentive expression. The women also turn, appearing apprehensive about what was happening. Suddenly, a man in a hat emerges, walking through the crowd. Arriving with his assistant, he adjusts his glasses while observing everything. Looking at the crowd, he says it's time to start. Then, the announcer shouts that the time has come to reveal the results. He prepares and starts drumming with great force. With the drumsticks, he hits the surface of the drum with all his might. Over the megaphone, the president announces that the sales champion is Yoisei. Immediately, her name appears at the top of the event's main scoreboard. Her colleagues comment that she is incredible, as expected by everyone. Receiving congratulations, Yoisei simply thanks her colleagues for the recognition. Commenting on the result, a friend says Yoisei will be one of the 4 supremes. Crying heavily, she says living with Yoisei is the treasure of her life. Announcing second place, the president calls Mio's name over the megaphone. Approaching, Kumika congratulates Yoisei on her great victory. Surprised by the gesture, Yoisei comments that it's rare to hear congratulations from Kumika. In response, Kumika tells her not to act like she's a heartless villain. She claims she can at least offer congratulations, and Yoisei apologizes. She mentions that the 4 Supremes get a mansion, confessing that Yoisei was a nuisance, but she admits that with her departure, things will be a bit lonely. Hearing the comment, Yoisei gives a smile before the third place announcement. Using the megaphone, the president announces that third place goes to Kumika. With a radiant face, Kumika celebrates the news she just received. To congratulate her, Yoisei lands a hard slap on her colleague's back. Complaining about the pain, she asks Yoisei not to hit with such brute force. Yoisei apologizes, explaining she got excited and used too much strength. Turning to the others, she asks them to take good care of Pawn. Then, the president announces 10th place, keeping the atmosphere lively. But when they reach the halfway point, silence begins to take over. In that island of misery, the district was considered a true paradise. For this reason, the idea of being expelled was terrifying. With a sweaty face, the girl awaits the announcement of the final positions. For all of them, expulsion was basically a death sentence. For those not yet called, the pressure of elimination only increased. Then the president prepares to announce 22nd place. She shouts Ron's name, and her rival celebrates the position. In disbelief, Ron says she lost to that unhealthy girl. The other responds that her glamorous body type also has its demand. Right after, Pawn is announced as the 23rd place finisher. Seeing the reaction, Kosuzu asks if she's happy about losing. Her friend approaches and asks her not to worry about it. Yoisei says she had customers and there's no way she'll be last, but the president announces that out of boredom, she would reveal everything at once. On the board, Kosuzu appears in 30th, narrowly escaping the last position. Relieved, she prepares to continue her life in the district as usual. With a smile, the president concludes the sales ranking for that month. She then warns that those were only the preliminary evaluation results. Mentioning a report, she talks about bonus points and penalties. She announces that the rankings will be completely reorganized because of this. Striking the gong, the man shouts that now come the real results. The scoreboard then begins to update all positions and names. The last 2 spots flash, and Yoisei watches without understanding anything. Her rivals also don't understand, questioning what was happening. The names start fitting into the middle positions of the ranking. In the end, Kosuzu's name appears in the very last spot on the board. Completely paralyzed, she cannot believe what just happened. Whispering among themselves, the women question what Kosuzu might have done. On stage, the president asks why the announcer is so quiet. She orders him to liven up the event or he won't be doing his job. Surprised by the command, the man fails to react for a moment. Then, shouting into the microphone, he announces the massive plot twist regarding the last place ranking. While Kosuzu remains in shock, Yoisei finds the whole situation tedious. With an annoyed expression, Yoisei clicks her tongue in disapproval. Interrupting everyone, she asks the president for permission to ask a question. In response, the president praises Yoisei for her hard work that month. Defending her friend, Yoisei questions exactly what violation Kosuzu committed. With a smile, the president calls Yoisei a cruel person too. She asks if Yoisei really wants that shameful violation exposed right here. Backing down, Yoisei shouts that it wasn't her intention. Accepting the request, the president says humiliation is part of the punishment. She orders the announcer to read Article 23 of the local code. Shouting the rule, he explains it forbids sleeping with first-time customers. Complaining about the noise, he says that rule is common knowledge. The president then asks asks the girl if she was obviously aware of it. Stammering, Kosuzu doesn't answer, and Yoichi questions her about what she did. The president explains that the district is no ordinary place. Describing the area, she calls it a playground for wealthy executives. She asserts they don't deal with simple, common clients. Amidst the crowd, he just watches the conversation unfold. When she asks about the district's value, she answers herself, its unattainability. Using an analogy, she talks about a designer bag on sale. According to her, no man pays a high price for a woman who gives in easily. By teasing without satisfying, they increase their own value. Even so, she says the last place finisher lay down with a rookie. Crying, the girl cannot deny the president's accusation. Faced with the confession, the other women turn to look at her. Turning to her friends, she says she loves the city and the group. She explains that this love made her terrified of being fired. With her face blurred, her rival just watches the scene from afar. Crying, Kosuzu says she couldn't get customers and the few she had left. In a flashback, a man threatens her with a knife to her face. Desperate, she begs for one more chance, promising never to do it again. Through the megaphone, the president asks if she's stupid. She says they dress her and turn her into a valuable brand, but the girl devalued herself, acting foolishly and without thought. With contempt, the president says she's no better than trash. Kosuzu cries, paralyzed by the harsh words. The president then offers thanks for the report that exposed the violation. In the crowd, a girl notices something strange on the scoreboard. Calling her friend, she says something terrible is happening. The scoreboard suddenly begins to shift and update the positions again. Kumika's name rises to the top spot in the ranking. Turning to her colleague, Yoichi says she can't believe it was her. With a smile, Kumika opens her mouth to justify herself. She says rules are rules, and she couldn't just ignore the situation. Grabbing Kumika, Yoichi screams, asking how she could do such a thing. Kneeling on the floor, Kosuzu can't believe what just happened. In a flashback, she remembers a conversation with Kumika. That night, Kumika had encouraged her to sleep with the customers quickly. Crying, she asks if Kumika tricked her and set the whole thing up. With a smile, Kumika says she has no idea what she's talking about. On stage, the president praises the informant who protected the local dignity. She congratulates Kumika, who has been promoted to the Four Supremes because of this. With a satisfied smile, she asks for a round of applause. In the audience, the women clap, saying the punishment was deserved. Holding her colleague by her clothes, Yoichi glares at her with pure rage. Reacting to the provocation, Kumika lands a hard slap on Yoichi's face. Looking down on her, she declares herself one of the new Four Supremes. Screaming in anger, she orders Yoichi not to touch her, calling her an inferior. Surrounded by the others, she claims the heavens are always watching. Winking, she says justice prevails, or at least that's what they say. As night falls, the flower district finally calms down a bit. Inside a room, various groups are gathered in their corners. On a sofa, one of them comments on how quiet the Camellia group has become. After the evaluation ended, he still maintained a serious expression. The difference in treatment between the informant and the offender was obvious. As the informant, Kumika entered a luxury car. Meanwhile, the offender was dragged by guards toward the gate, her face twisted in agony as she was taken out of the district. Yoichi and her colleagues just watched the scene unfold from a distance. Back in the room, Yoichi lets out a long, heavy sigh. One of the girls lying on the sofa says she's lost her motivation. She still wonders what Kosuzu was thinking when she pulled such a stunt. Sitting alone at the table, Yoichi downs a glass of liquor in one go. She slams the glass down hard, spilling some on the table. At that, he approaches and tells her to stop and go to sleep. Raising her glass, she says it's not that simple. She reminds him he has a duty to protect the place until she's asleep. Without looking at her, he just tells her to do whatever she wants. Sitting on the floor, he says, "Drunks are a nuisance in any world." Silently, she stares at him for a moment before speaking again. She says that in this city, informants are celebrated as great heroes. Angrily, she screams that they blame Kosuzu, but don't talk about Kumika. Punching the table, she says the whole situation is messed up. He explains that discipline is a basic principle for any group. She agrees, but says treating snitching as an achievement is wrong. He then asks if she's just mad about losing first place. Setting her glass on the table, she seems to have become quite irritated. Turning her face away, she warns she isn't in the mood for jokes. Closing his eyes, he apologizes for his poor choice of words. She exhales smoke and begins to talk about the island. She says the courtesans live in luxury, wanting for nothing. Filling her glass, she asks if he sees the city as a paradise. He responds that the residents told him the place was paradise. For that reason, he thought maybe it was exactly what it seemed. Laughing at his words, she says they are all under constant surveillance. She explains they all dance between the fear of being fired and a promotion. Calling it selling themselves, She labels this happiness a delusion. Listening intently, he keeps his gaze fixed on her. He adds that they are being tricked into working until the end of their lives. All of this was done directly by Lady Kikyo, the district president. He reflects on what that woman hides underneath. Beneath the smile, she hides cruelty and a desire for control. He asks if it was the president who created this entire system. Looking aside, she comments that he catches on pretty fast. With her back to him, Yoisi asserts that Lady Kikyo is terrifying. She screams that the president sees them as nothing more than cattle. In silence, he just listens to her vent. Suddenly, the boy enters screaming that he's gathered a lot of important info. Passing right by Yoisi, he runs toward his boss. Not understanding, she asks what he meant by information. At that, the boy notices her presence and covers his mouth in a fright. With a bit of irritation, he clicks his tongue at the scene. She then asks the boy exactly what that information was about. Stammering, the boy can't answer and doesn't know what to do. Walking around the table, she asks what he meant by information. With trembling hands, the boy stammers, unable to answer the question. Grabbing his face, she orders him to speak up immediately. Trying to pull away, he denies it, saying he can't say a word. Struggling, he screams that he cannot betray Michio's trust. From afar, his boss wonders if the boy is just plain stupid. He then shouts that he would rather die than betray his boss. Faced with his refusal, she asks if he remembers the local code. He confirms that he studied desperately just to be hired in that district. Full of confidence, he says he can recite the whole thing from memory for her. She then takes her fan and challenges him to recite Article 3. Startled by the challenge, the boy is speechless for a moment. He then recites the rule about not disobeying one's hierarchical superiors. With a smile, she pats his head and congratulates him. She reminds him that the code forbids him from disobeying her. She then accuses him of trying to defy her orders, which is a serious matter. With her fan, she threatens to report him to the local government. Terrified by the threat, he just nods his head, breaking into a cold sweat. At that, his boss reflects on what she herself had said before. Showing 2 fingers, she tells him she will give him 2 choices. The first option was to keep his mouth shut and face the consequences. With expulsion as the punishment, the boy shakes his head in terror. With a smile, she says she isn't a demon and offers another option. She asks him to tell her everything, no matter what the information is. As a reward, she promises not to report either him or his boss. Grateful, the boy praises Yoisi for her immense kindness toward them. Repeating himself several times, he asks if he can finally share the information. Observing the scene, his boss thinks about how easy the boy is to manipulate. Starting to talk, he says that he followed the offender after the evaluation. Speaking loudly, she tells him to be quiet, so no one hears them. She asks if he was the one who gave the order, and he confirms it. He then asks if she isn't curious about the fate of those who are expelled. For that reason, he thought there must be something important at their destination. Agreeing, she mentions the rumors about human experiments on expelled courtesans. He then wonders if they are taken to some sort of disposal facility, or if they are simply transported off the island for good. Turning to the boy, she asks where on the island Kosuzu was taken. He then reveals that Miss Kosuzu was not actually expelled. Surprised by the revelation, the 2 of them question what he just said. Grabbing the boy, she demands to know where Kosuzu is, but he asks her to stay calm. Starting to explain, he says the men in suits took Kosuzu away. In a flashback, he followed them from a distance, running across the rooftops. They stopped before the gate while the guards checked to see if the coast was clear. Suddenly, the scene he witnesses leaves him unable to move. Instead of leaving, they simply turned and headed toward the east wall. She questions the boy, saying the east wall is a dead end. With a serious look, he confirms that Kosuzu entered the building in the alley. Not understanding a thing, Yoisi has a look of surprise on her face. Turning her back, she says that what he described is impossible. He then tells her to stop the drama and just ask which building it is. With a worried expression, she says there's only a clinic there. She then reveals that it is the clinic of the well-known Dr. Muroi. Surprised, he asks if she's sure about that. He begins to think about the whereabouts of the woman who was expelled. With this revelation, he has a new suspicion about what might have happened. With a slight smile, he begins to understand the whole situation better. The expelled woman was under the care of the hated Dr. Rin. Standing up, she leaves, and the boy asks where she is going. At that, he also stands up, and the boy questions what he's doing. Turning to the boy, he forbids him from coming along. Startled by the order, the boy doesn't know how to react. Ignoring his boss, he follows him down the hall, calling his name. He then turns around and explains that there might be a fight at the location. Now outside, the 2 of them walk together down the dark corridor. She asks what he wants and where he thinks he's going. Silently, She stares at him with a serious and suspicious gaze. With the same expression, he insists on knowing where she is going. Asking her to go back and sleep, he hears that she cannot do that. He then says it is his duty to protect his exclusive courtesan. Turning her face away, she doesn't answer but seems to accept the company. Without further discussion, the two continue walking side by side. Arriving in front of the clinic, she says they have reached their final destination. In front of the Muroi clinic, a sign showed the place was closed. Letting out a long sigh, she prepares to call for someone inside. Knocking on the door, she shouts the doctor's name and asks them to open up. With her hand on the doorframe, she persists and keeps shouting for the doctor. Suddenly, the front door opens slightly, breaking the silence. From inside the place, a gaze fixes on the two of them. A young assistant asks what they want at this time of night. She then says she's feeling very sick and asks for the doctor. Asking them to leave, the youth warns that the doctor is resting. With the refusal, she begins to stutter, not knowing what to say. Putting her hand to her mouth, she insists she is feeling very ill. Suddenly, his gaze turns to the second floor of the clinic. He then observes the upper floor of the building intently for a moment. Not understanding what he was looking at, she focuses back on the assistant. Seeing her appearance, the young man says she looks perfectly healthy. Holding the door, she doesn't accept the young assistant's refusal. She then pushes him and says he doesn't know anything. Calmly, he warns that this area is forbidden for non-patients. Standing on the threshold, she is warned by the young clinic assistant. He says that if she takes one more step, they will be strict. Startled by the threat, she takes a step back and looks at him. Suddenly, her bodyguard picks her up and apologizes for the trouble. Trying to break free, she screams, but he reminds her that the doctor is resting. He then carries her away, and she yells for him to put her down. In her ear, he whispers for her to just listen without reacting. He then reveals that the building has multiple surveillance cameras installed. Surprised, she questions the information, and he says he counted 18 cameras. While being carried, she asks why a clinic would have so many cameras. He then says there is either a treasure or a great secret there. Hearing the theory, she simply stays silent, processing the information. Looking back, he begins to better analyze the current situation. Thinking about what he saw, he concludes the clinic is hiding a secret. He then says they don't have enough information to act at the moment. On the other side, the assistant watches them from inside the dark clinic. In silence, he also understands that it is not yet the right time. Carrying her in his arms, he wonders what the next step should be. Changing scenes. 3 days have passed since the monthly evaluation. With a finger to her lips, Yoisi seems to be evaluating something in front of her. Kneeling, a woman hears that her appearance isn't half bad for the place. With her fan, Yoisi announces that the woman has passed the evaluation. Calling her Rina, she prepares to give the final result. With a smile, Yoisi says that from that day on, she is a courtesan. With an expression of surprise, the woman doesn't seem to understand the situation. Flashing back 3 days, they sat at the table discussing their visit to the clinic. The three of them remained silent, processing the events of that day. Questioning the reason for so many cameras, she tried to figure out the clinic's secret. Then, he asserted that Rin's target was undoubtedly the doctor. For some reason, the doctor maintained a clinic there to hide a secret, one that absolutely no one could discover. Breaking the silence, the boy tried to say something to the two of them. Seeing them so quiet, he prepared to lighten the mood. Having an idea, he asked who would replace Kumika and Kosuzu in the district. Caught off guard by the question, she looked toward the boy. While he mentioned the local government would fill the spots, she asked exactly where they would come from. She replied that they likely come from off-island, through some specific route. Surprised by the answer, he repeated her words about them coming from the outside. Standing up, he asked if she and the others also came from elsewhere. With an irritated look, she warned him that investigating the past is forbidden. She stated that no one there truly knows her history. Furthermore, she knew nothing about Ron and Pon's pasts either. Hearing this, he simply noted that it was a complicated situation. Getting up, she said she was tired and headed to bed. The boy admitted he was nervous about the arrival of someone new. He then asked if she could reject the people the government brought in. Touching her chest, she replied that she had the final say in the decision. With this revelation, a spark appeared in his eyes. He then asked if he could bring a candidate for her to evaluate himself. She said yes, but added there were no suitable women on the island. Opening her fan, she bragged that her screening process was very rigorous. With a smile, the boy questioned him, but he simply nodded in confirmation. Smirking, he said he just needed to mention an emergency patient. Surprised, the boy caught on to the plan and stood there in shock. Back in the present, Yoisi informed the doctor that she was now a courtesan. Confused, the doctor watched the scene with a puzzled expression. Kneeling, she begged them not to do this, rejecting their proposal. She stated she had no intention of becoming a courtesan. Confused, she asked about the emergency patient mentioned earlier. She then discovered there was no such patient, leaving her shocked by the revelation. Turning to the two of them, Yoisi ordered them to teach the newcomer everything. Faced with the order, the woman stood paralyzed, unable to react. She then turned and looked at him with pure rage in her eyes. A woman screamed that she had been tricked. Kneeling on the ground, The boy apologized repeatedly to the doctor. Grabbing him by his clothes, she asked if he was the one who set the whole thing up. Holding her tie, he admitted the situation was indeed quite strange. She remembered how the boy had announced the emergency in such a monotone voice. On the way, he had apologized so much that she actually felt worried for him. Putting her hands to her head, she said she never thought he would lie. Pointing at him, she accused him of using a child to deceive her. He then revealed that her target, Kenzaki, was in that very city. Shocked by the revelation, she stood speechless with wide eyes. He then warned her that there would be a chance to find him the following day. With a serious expression, she held her ground and accepted the proposal. The next day, the doctor and his assistant arrived for a consultation. A woman greeted him at the door, asking if he was all right. Hidden away, the two observed the scene, but they were too far to see clearly. With the monthly evaluation over, he guaranteed that an opportunity would appear for her. With a determined expression, she agreed and waited for the moment to arise. The doctor then knocked on another door, announcing his arrival for the exam. Being welcomed in, he entered the room to begin the medical consultation. At the entrance, a new courtesan awaited him, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. Winking, she introduced herself as Rinko, the district's newest girl. Hearing the introduction, the doctor simply commented on her being new there. Asking for permission to enter, he mentioned that this used to be Miss Kosuzu's room. Taking off his hat, he introduced himself as Dr. Muroi of the Flower District. Upon hearing his name, she froze completely, unable to move. Analyzing every detail of his face, she had to be certain of his identity. With sweat dripping down, she continued to stare at him without saying a single word. Finally, she confirmed that the man in front of her was indeed her target, Kenzaki. Kneeling, she said she felt relieved he was such a kind doctor. With a smile behind her mask, she said she had been desperate to find him. Drawing a dagger, she revealed that she had wanted to kill him for a long, long time. Firmly, she grips the handle of the dagger, ready to strike. In a flashback, he warns her to absolutely not kill her target. He explains that the doctor's assistant would likely kill her immediately afterward. For that reason, he asks her not to try to kill him if she wants to succeed. He even asserts that the time to kill him has not yet arrived. Back in the present, she pulls back her arm and puts the dagger away. Seeing her expression, the doctor asks if there is anything wrong with her. She then says she is fine and asks him to proceed with the exam. Putting on his stethoscope, he asks if she has been eating well. Continuing the exam, he asks if she has been able to sleep well. He then asks if she has a history of illnesses or surgeries. Afterward, he questions if she takes any medication or if her parents have any diseases. Asking about genetic conditions, he also wants to know if she catches colds. He continues the exam, asking about high fevers and other ailments. Finishing the questionnaire, he says he understands and stares at her with a smile. With the clipboard in hand, he says her organs and systems are excellent. With a strange look, he comments that her body has always been like this. In her thoughts, she confirms that her body has always been this way. In a flashback, she remembers when she worked in conflict zones with soldiers. Begging for death, a soldier said he couldn't take the situation anymore. With his back turned, the doctor only lamented it, finding it a great waste. With a smile, he said the soldier could become his test subject. She then screamed, saying that was an inappropriate thing to say. Turning to her, he said the soldier was useless and could not serve. Then he said he could advance science by 30 years with them. Back in the present, she thinks that he has always seen humans as samples. Looking at him, she wonders what he might be planning there. Breaking the silence, he says he forgot to ask her age. Without hesitation, she replies that she is 28 years old. Surprised, the doctor repeats her age, appearing not to believe it. His reaction gives her a new suspicion about her target. Ending the exam, the doctor says there are no problems with her health. Putting on his hat, he says goodbye and mentions he has others to see. Calling his assistant, he turns and leaves, leaving her alone. Watching him go, she wonders if he lost interest because of her age. Staring into space, she begins to formulate a new theory about Kenzaki. Sitting at the table, she hears him ask her to explain what she discovered. She then says she needs to explain the unusual nature of their target. Not understanding, he just stares at her, waiting for the explanation she promised. She reminds him that she already mentioned working for Doctors Without Borders. There, in the midst of her work, was where she met Kenzaki for the first time. Coming from Japan, only 3 people joined the organization at that time. It was her, Kenzaki, and another man named Satsuma. Being all Japanese, they ended up becoming friends at the camp. But even back then, she remembers that Kenzaki was a bit strange. At that time, she believed he was simply passionate about medicine. In front of her, a patient lay tied to a stretcher. Shocked, they asked what Kenzaki was doing with that patient. With a smile, he said he was testing a transplant surgery. Showing the leg, he said he found a good one for the transplant. Terrified, Satsuma asked if he understood what he was doing there. He then explained that many soldiers leave the front because they lose limbs. With a shout, he said that battlefield medicine would be transformed by this. Speechless, The two looked in shock at the patient on the stretcher. The patient then began to writhe and shake violently on the stretcher. With his eyes rolled back, he foamed at the mouth, unable to control himself. Seeing the scene, Kenzaki lamented the immune rejection that was occurring. Coldly, Satsuma ordered the patient to be thrown onto the battlefield. Citing Thomas Edison, Kenzaki said there is no failure, only learning. With a spark in his eyes, he seemed to become even more obsessed. Irritated, Satsuma landed a direct blow to his colleague's face. Holding him by his clothes, he said he could not allow that surgery. Furthermore, he pointed out that it was an enemy soldier's leg. Shouting in anger, he said that was outside of medical ethics. Lying on the ground, Kenzaki said that ethics only hinder progress. Without understanding, Satsuma asked what he was talking about at that moment. He then questioned if medicine progresses because of medical ethics. Staring at Satsuma, he prepared to continue his argument. Gritting his teeth, Satsuma only observed him with deep rage in his eyes. After the fight, the outcome of that situation was quite simple. For violating the rules, Kenzaki was sentenced to 14 days of confinement. With a mosquito on his face, he just stared at the ceiling of the cell. But those 14 days pushed him to the limit of his sanity. Barefoot, he walked slowly down the prison corridor. At that time, they had volunteered to supervise Kenzaki due to a staff shortage. Satsuma believed Kenzaki would learn from his mistakes and return to normal. Reaching the cell, he told the prisoner it was time to eat. Suddenly, he stepped into a pool of blood on the cell floor. Looking inside, he was shocked by what he saw. Running to the door, he tried to open it, shouting to ask what Kenzaki had done. Unable to open the door, he kept screaming for his colleague. On the floor, the food he brought was scattered and spilled everywhere. Looking at the victim, Kenzaki lamented that the organs were good, but the vessel was not. Holding a scalpel, he said that as parts, they would serve his experiments. Seeing the scene, Satsuma called him a bastard. Pure rage in his voice. With a smile, Kenzaki said he had arrived at the perfect time. Without hesitation, he threw a scalpel at his colleague. Hit in the neck, Satsuma reached for the wound, unable to understand. Kenzaki then explained that he needed new subjects and surgical instruments. With a grin, he compared the situation to a patient bringing his own scalpel. Slumped on the floor, Satsuma tried to say Kenzaki's name before dying. When she reached the cell, she realized something had gone horribly wrong. Inside, the remains of what was once Satsuma were scattered across the floor. Horrified by the scene, she screamed, and after that, Kenzaki simply vanished. Back in the present, he asks if that's why she's hunting him. Thinking for a moment, she says that might just be an excuse for her. With a smile, she reveals she wants revenge for her fiancé's death. Hearing the revelation, he remains silent, not saying a word. He then asks what Kenzaki's goal would be in that specific place. She explains that he is a mad scientist obsessed with body modification. For that reason, there could only be one motive for him to hide there. With that, he understands the doctor's grand objective on the island. His sole purpose was to perfect the terrible modification of the human body. She concludes that the clinic must hold the doctor's dark secret. Suddenly, Yoisi turns around and realizes someone has overheard the conversation. With her fan in hand, she prepares to confront the person. Walking to the table, the woman says she heard everything and has her suspicions. With tears in her eyes, the doctor asks to ask a question. Pointing at her face, Yoisi asks about the smeared makeup. She then says she was moved by the woman's determination. The doctor asks her to keep her secret, and Yoisi promises to help. Turning to her, Yoisi says she will assist in her mission. Surprised, neither of them expected that reaction from the courtesan. Calling out to him, she orders him to infiltrate the clinic with Rinne. He then says that if the doctor is doing something wrong, they will act. With the evidence, she claims they can punish him using the local code. Kneeling on the floor, Rinne screams that punishment is far too little for him. Yoisi then reminds her that killing is forbidden under the district's rules. Touching her, Yoisi says doctors must keep people alive. She says that killing him would make her just like the person she despises. Irritated, Rinne simply clicks her tongue in response. Sitting in his chair, he says he agrees with most of the plan, but he warns that he will kill the doctor if he deems it necessary. Showing his hand, he says they are already dirty anyway. He then says he would have raided the clinic already if he could, but he reminds her that the place has dozens of surveillance cameras. She offers her help, but he questions her acting skills. With her hand over her mouth, she recalls her performance in front of the clinic. Suddenly, the boy comes running, catching Yoisi's attention. With a smile, he says he brought the bottle she asked for. Handing the bottle to her, he is thanked for his help. She then pops the cork with great ease and speed. Without using a glass, she tips the bottle back and drinks straight from the neck. He asks what she's planning, and the doctor watches, confused. With her mouth full, she says she's not good at actual acting. Watching the scene, the doctor breaks into a cold sweat, not understanding the situation. He then says she's going to become a real drunken patient. With the bottle in hand, she says she'll lure them out and is counting on him. The doctor and he are shocked by the courtesan's boldness. Suddenly, she runs and prepares to jump out the window. Without hesitating, she leaps from the building's second floor. On the street, she falls hard onto one of the men in suits. With the impact, Both crash onto the stone floor. Startled by the noise, everyone runs to see what happened. Slumped on the ground, Yoisi writhes as people recognize her. He then shouts for them to call a doctor and not to touch her head. The doctor says the situation is serious and they need to treat her. Clenching her fist, Rina understands the plan and prepares to act. Behind her, he asks if she's going to waste Yoisi's determination. He then says the emergency will force them to leave the clinic empty. With the target gone, they will have the perfect opportunity to break in. On the street, the doctor and his assistant finally arrive at the scene of the accident. Lying there, Yoisi tells Rina not to fail and says she's counting on her. In front of the clinic, the two prepare to enter the building. Running, he uses his arm to smash the front door. With a single blow, he shatters the wood and opens the way. Worried about the noise, she comments that he is being very bold. With the door open, he calls her and says they need to move fast. Sweating, she prepares to enter and begin the search of the clinic. Entering the room, he observes the dark and silent environment. With a serious look, he notes that there is nothing unusual. Emerging from the back, she says that there was only a storage room there. He says there is nothing suspicious, but she finds it hard to believe. Suddenly, he seems to notice something, and his eyes widen. He throws himself to the floor, and she asks what happened. With his ear to the ground, he remains silent, concentrating. Lying down, he says he can hear a sound coming from below. Following the noise, he finds the source under the examination table. Looking closely, he discovers there is a basement in that room. Under the exam table, a secret ladder led to the subfloor. Lighting the way, the two descend the long ladder into the basement. At the bottom of the stairs, they find a large metal door. Without hesitation, he grabs the handle and opens the basement door. Inside, the two face something completely unexpected and shocking. On the street, a crowd forms around Yoise, who has fallen to the ground. With blood in her mouth, she moans in pain, unable to move. The doctor says she broke something and that he will treat her right there. Lying on the stretcher, she thinks that this will buy them plenty of time. In her thoughts, she blinks and sends a signal to her companions. Lying on the ground, she wonders where her attendant went. The doctor approaches and asks if she is looking for something. With a smile, he asks if she is looking for Roku. Surprised, she stares at him, not knowing how to respond to his question. He then reveals that he sent his assistant back to the clinic. Looking at the scene from above, he says that didn't look like an accident. With the revelation, she is shocked and stammers, unable to explain herself. With a dark look, he asks why she jumped on purpose. Worried, she thinks that he knows and warns them to be careful. Back in the basement, the two prepare for what they will find. Walking through the basement, they come across a massive secret laboratory. Inside a capsule, a man with a respirator was completely motionless. Horrified, she wonders if these were large-scale, inhuman experiments. Clenching her teeth, she repeats Kenzaki's name with pure hatred. Angrily, she punches the glass and screams about how monstrous he can be. Suddenly, she feels something touch her hand on the lab floor. Turning around, she sees a creature crawling toward her. With wide eyes, she screams, terrified by the scene. Crawling along the floor, a humanoid creature approaches her, crying loudly. The creature, with tears in its eyes, was making a loud sobbing sound. Crawling, it approaches and stops right in front of the two visitors. With a serious look, he says he understands the situation of those people. Kneeling, he says their dignity has been continuously stolen by the doctor. Picking up a knife, he says he understands and prepares to act. With the knife in hand, he promises he will let them end their lives. Suddenly, a projectile hits the floor near his hand. Turning around, he faces the person who threw the object toward him. With a focused look, he prepares for the coming combat. His face is then hit, leaving a cut on his cheek. From a distance, the doctor's assistant says that cannot be done. With a cut on his face, he just keeps staring at his opponent. The young man says he cannot kill the doctor's test subjects. Clenching her teeth, she repeats the young man's words with disgust. Screaming in anger, she says they are real human beings. The assistant draws his sword and says he needs to eliminate the intruders. Without hesitation, he runs toward her to attack with his blade. With sword in hand, he prepares to land a blow. Surprised, she sees the attack coming her way, unable to react. At that, he steps in front and blocks the strike with his weapon. Pushing the youth back, he says he can't find the two women. Shouting, he tells Rina to go ahead with their mission. With a determined look, she nods and prepares to run. Kicking the assistant, she screams for her companion not to die. With sword in hand, the young man says he won't let her pass. With the distraction, Rini manages to run to the back of the lab. With his face wounded, he just watches the ongoing fight. He then grabs the youth's blade with his bare hands. Surprised, the boy tries to pull his weapon back but can't. With that, he is thrown to the side and nearly loses his balance. With the help, he manages to pull away and create some distance. The assistant says this is problematic and that he needs to stop them. He then says his speed is no match for his own. Preparing his weapon, the youth says he will finish him instantly. With a